Operation Bagration was a campaign fought between the Russian and German armies during World War II. It occurred June 22nd and August 19th of 1944, just 58 days. The field of conflict was Belarusia, part of the Eastern Front of the war. D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944, Operation Overlord had just happened about 2 weeks prior on the Western Front. Nazi Germany now had the challenge of fighting on two major fronts at the same time. In the end, the Russians won. They destroyed 28 of 34 divisions of German Army Group Center and completely shattered the German front line. It was the biggest defeat in German military history. There were 450,000 German casualties. Also 300,000 more German soldiers were cut off in the Courland Pocket, a peninsula in the northwestern section of Latvia, and were surrounded by the Red Army until May of 1945.
Right. Those are good points. And I've followed the literature over the years. I mean, it's been very interesting to see how these debates have gone on. Someone like Mearsheimer, by the way, it's sort of interesting. Mearsheimer, who now is like the big critique of American foreign policy globally, his dissertation was on Little Heart. He did a big critique of Little Heart years ago. And so it's always an interesting topic that people come back to. Excuse me.
Well, if anybody, I don't know if you're allowed to promote your product on this, but if you fancy a
no,
tome
please,
on the
unabashed marketing, don't worry about it, man.
Okay. But it is fundamentally a cultural and social problem, I think, among the British officer class, and it was fascinating reading the original letters and the opinions that people had of each other's performance. Really, really interesting writing, I think.
Yeah. So, and who published it?
A company called Hellion.
Oh, Hellion. Yes, yep. Yes.
They were. I was very pleased to get a publisher. I never had much contact with them after that, except for just sending the manuscript to them. But they did a decent enough job on it, and to get in print at all was surprising, really.
Yeah. No, he's. It's funny. I had a conversation with the owner of that company a couple of weeks ago. Very interesting guy.
Very energetic. I never met him, but his reply to emails. His replies are usually dated 5 a.m. kind of thing.
Right. And he's also lucky. He lives at. He told me he lived at Stratford-on-Avon, which I said, "Oh, you lucky guy, man! You just go down there and go nuts with Shakespeare all the time."
It's I think he's not very far from Stratford. I think rather than in Stratford, but
right.
A
suburb.
No harm in beefing up the reputation a bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Alex, how are you feeling today?
All right. Been
you haven't caught my cold, have you?
With the presentation, so
you haven't caught my cold.
Did.
Alex, you didn't catch my cold?
No, not
good.
So.
Very good. Very good. All right, good. Very good. I don't want you to get a cold.
Or from
Gail, what?
Or from Gail.
That's right. Exactly. Just stay away from both of us until this is over. How are you doing, Hal?
I'm fine. Just back from vacation.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah.
Good old Detroit.
Yeah. We didn't vacation in Detroit.
Right.
Hey, hi, Al. I'm recording this. Can you? You're going to sit down. Great. Good. Perfect.
Well, I'll be moving around.
Okay, that's fine.
And
once in a while, let's see what you look like. That's good.
Okay. Right. When I'm moving around, do you want me to pick off video?
No, only if you're going to be standing most of the time. Just tip the top back. Just the way you look now, in the middle of the screen.
Okay.
Yeah, only if you do a strip tease, Hal.
Yeah.
Oh, please no.
Well, the chance of
I
that.
I want to tell everybody, you can't tell because Jim has a picture up there. He's not wearing a mask. I'm tell you that.
No, I have a bad cold. Anyway, Dermot, how are you today, Dermot?
Oh, who's that? Oh, Dermot.
Hello.
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm a new boy, and I've clicked on just as my son is learning how to hang up washing, and he's scowling. Here you go. It's a bit of video. That's my face.
Oh, nice to see you, Dermot. Okay, cool.
I'm an old Bagration fan, and I hope I pronounce it right. I had the Zygola book about 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And yes, non-fashionable, exciting operations are my bag. But
well, that sounds interesting. That sounds interesting, Dermot. It's funny. I just was finishing Dimbleby's new book on this whole situation, which is actually not bad.
Oh, cool.
Dimbleby just came out with a new book on it, and it's we'll have fun with this subject. I think we're going to deal with this subject for at least
All right.
five to six sessions. There's so much to go over because we've got we are very fortunate. One of our colleagues digitized about 2,000 of David Glantz's maps a couple of months ago, and our objective is to digitize all his maps, which is like, forget about it. It's like 10,000 maps. But we have, what I'll put in the chat at some point is his atlas on Bagration, so people can take it and look at it, because it gets into great operational detail as to the battle itself. And since there's a whole unfolding of operations by the Soviet Army, including their Lvov-Sandomierz operation, where they nearly reached Warsaw, and then you have the Warsaw Uprising going on, and you have the operations in September where they put the Romanians out of the war. There's all this interesting stuff to explore. And plus with Churchill, I mean, Churchill is going nuts while this period is underway. There's all sorts of interesting aspects of this, and we welcome others to contribute and add their 2 cents to this as we do it. And we're not going to one thing I learned from David Glantz a long time ago is basically how we run these is we don't want to, drone on incessantly for hours, trust me, everybody here can do that. We have the ability to do that. But we want everybody to, whenever they feel they want to make a comment or add something to the thing, don't hesitate to raise your hand and interject. Because we're all here to enjoy ourselves and learn from each other. And that's how we view this. And so don't hesitate to do that. There'll be people coming on. Hopefully we'll have Steve Zaloga, maybe Craig Luther. There'll be people who are even more accomplished in terms of their writing on this subject than I am, for sure. Many times better. And so I will shamelessly tap on those guys when they come into this discussion. Unfortunately, it's difficult to get Colonel Glantz these days because he's completely involved in taking care of his wife. His wife is very ill, and it's hard I would prefer him to do these than me, frankly. But given the fact that he's out of action, he's essentially 24/7 involved in taking care of his wife now for a couple of years. It's very difficult to predict when we can get David. But we will do that at some point, Anyway, so that, Dermot, don't hesitate to, shut us loudmouthed and talkative Americans down anytime you want, man.
You'll get no shouting from me. I just might have to intervene in this argument brewing at the end of the room.
Exactly. And we'll wait a little bit to get going. I'll give it another couple of minutes because there's a lot of material to go over. What I'll do right now is I'll just simply introduce some of the things we're going to talk about in the next days to come. Today, I'll just put up on the screen here. This is part 2 of the discussions we've been doing on Bagration. The whole series that we're doing is in part, we're doing this in part in the memory of a friend of all of ours here, John Prowse, who died 2 years ago now. John was a very prolific scholar of military history, a guy designed 30 games, I believe, 30 war games during his life. He did the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich war game. And John, of course, would have been with us today if he was around. So anyway, just to get that over with, because we just want to make that clear that part of what got us inspired to do this was to do this in honor of his memory. Now, Noisy Reality is essentially a catch-all name, a production company that was created by actually a former girlfriend of mine. And we basically chose that name to cover everything. So while we're focusing today on military history, I've had worked as a journalist for many decades, and I've covered all sorts of different history topics and cultural topics. So I'm not necessarily pinned down all the time to talk about military history. But anyway, it's a lot of fun. And again, all of us here have been working together in New York in various forms. Bob Rowan's here. I'm one of the people who helped create the New York Military Affairs Symposium back in the early 80s. That came out of an effort at Columbia University in the 70s. So we've been putting on these kind of talks now for 40 to 50 years. And I also want to bring to your attention, Bob can give a little PR punch for NIMAS.org. Gregory McNiff, his World War II discussion forum is on this email I sent out to people, and you can, hear what he does. He's doing a lot of interesting things on a weekly basis. I don't know how he does it, frankly. But he's bringing on a lot of authors. Now, the one other event we're going to have coming on pretty quickly is we're going to be having David Stahill. Now, unfortunately for you guys in the UK, this is a bad time. I do apologize. We will record this and we'll post this. Because he's in Australia, we had to schedule it at this time. But he is going to talk about, those are familiar with David's work. David's done a whole series of books on the first year, basically, of the invasion of the Soviet Union by the Germans. His book after Barbarossa, I believe, is Kyiv, then Typhoon, and then the Battle of Moscow. And then he has a new book on the fighting from late 41 to early 42. He's on the verge of going to Germany on his leave. So I guess he's going to create some more work out of this. But that'll be on the 31st in the evening at 7:30, which, again, I do apologize for our comrades in the UK. That's a terrible time for you. I'm well aware of it. But we will record this, and we will post this on a Going Viral Combine website, which, excuse me, I have a cold, which we will post. Now, the material for Bagration is quite vast. And before I get into that, obviously, the work we do in talking about the Russian front is formed by the path-breaking work of John Erickson in the 60s. Really mind-boggling work that he did. I unfortunately never had the opportunity to meet him before he passed, but I did communicate him occasionally when he was teaching at the University of Edinburgh. And his work, of course, was quite influential on our ideas about what occurred in the whole look at the Russian front and Eastern Front. And then those of us here in the United States have been blessed with having a pretty close relationship with Colonel David Glantz when he was on active duty and when he's retired. And we refer to it as a Glantz-a-thon. When we get David talking, it's like, forget about it. I remember when I brought him to Columbia one time, he just does not subscribe to academic forum. And, if he's talking for an hour, he's just getting warmed up. And the best thing to do with David is just let him do his thing. It's like listening to a jazz saxophone player do a riff. David will just go on because his knowledge and internalization of the information on fighting on the Eastern Front is just so immense and mind-boggling that it's best to just let him go. And we will get David at some point, and we will try to schedule it at a time that people can listen to it in Europe too. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, he's very much involved in taking care of his wife. Finally, we'll have Craig Luther will probably join us, maybe Robert Kirschabel, and certainly Steve Zaloga. So a lot of the younger historians, not only here in the United States, but elsewhere in Europe, they, of course, have influenced our work about talking about Bagration and the Eastern Front in general. And all of us, of course, are very keen students on the European theater of operations. So I should add that one of the things I'm planning to do is I'm never happy with the kind of looks at D-Day and Overlord that are done, particularly in the United States, as someone who helped create NIMAS and the Arms Control Workshop, which it came from. Right from the start, we very much were focused in on a broad approach. So one of the things we want to do in the next couple of months is we want to sort of get a approach looking at Overlord that will be focused on the British and the Canadians in particular, because that tends to be, as we all know, given the national mythos of how the war is presented in the United States, tends to be relegated to the sidelines. And so that's a project we have underway that we're going to do. So without further ado, I'm going to start this. And what I'm going to do today is we're going to split it up into two things. We're going to focus on first the German army in preparation for Bagration. And then Alex is going to go through the issue of the Soviet army. And we've got lots of material to go through. There's many dimensions to this subject as I've been exploring. There's the issue of Maskarovka, the deception operation. There is no decent history in English. There are good histories of Soviet intelligence, but there's nothing, of course, compared to what F.A. Chinsley did for the British intelligence operations in World War II. Certainly nothing in the United States is comparable, at least in a classified form, about the OSS operations. But Maskarovka, of course, is the Soviet term for deception operations, and they just got better and better and better. And there's a whole bunch of other aspects to that we do not necessarily see in the in even David Glantz's book on Maskarovka, which we will go through at some point in the near future, because they got better in deceiving the Germans. And as we know from reading about Bletchley Park and all the other deception operations that are successful, that are used by the Allies in the Second World War, there's a whole dimension of how the Soviets operated that we still don't really know about. Now, let me first start with the German situation in 1944. At the time of this operation. Now, one of the things to stress that you'll see repeated here again and again is that we all know that by this point in time, there are about 6.5 million Soviet troops in action on the Eastern Front against about 2.5 million troops that the Axis is able to confront them with. The Soviets have taken tremendous casualties up to this point in the war, millions of dead and wounded. I'm not even talking about the civilian casualties. And nevertheless, they've been able to maintain and keep their formations in the field, create new formations. One thinks, of course, of Franz Halder's famous comment in was either July or August 1941 that, my God, they've got 300 plus divisions we have to fight against. So at this point in time, the Germans are facing a situation where they're just running out of manpower. And at the same time, their production rates have gone up because of this. I think Todt, if even Todt had not been killed in the airplane crash, I'm pretty sure he would have continued to have an efficient increase in production. But nevertheless, Speer is given a lot of credit and kudos for helping to renovate the arms production that Todt already had set in motion. That's at least some of the more recent interpretations of how Todt actually operated. And you had, of course, the fact that the Germans, because of their manpower problems, had essentially changed their structure in their infantry divisions from a triangular structure of 3 regiments down to 2 regiments. And this was more or less typical of the new units that were coming on. Now, the other issue to keep in mind is the effect, and we talked about this the last time. Alex sort of talked about this when he was using the German official history. But the whole impact of how Hitler wanted to rebuild and strengthen the forces in the West with Directive 51 in November of 1943, and essentially, hopefully, be able to build them up to the point. He brought Rommel in as Army Group Commander to essentially create a situation where he could defeat an invasion. And again, Rommel did one hell of a job in the time that he had to strengthen the defenses in Western Europe. One particular map I always find valuable to show about this is precisely the map that deals with what Rommel would have liked to have deployed against the Allies on D-Day. And I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. I will get to that picture in a moment. But what he basically did was he wanted to put the 12th SS right up against Omaha Beach and Utah Beach. He wanted to move Panzer right up against Omaha and the British and Canadian sector. And he wanted to move the 21st Panzer Division further up so that it would indeed be able to intervene in a more powerful way than it did on D-Day itself, although we know what happened to them. And then he also wanted to move the 3rd Anti-Aircraft Corps, which is essentially dozens of 88s, wanted to strengthen the sector of Omaha and against the British. So that would have made one heck of a difference if that, in fact, had been the deployment on D-Day that we had to confront. To think the 12th SS and Panzer right up there would have made a hell of a difference in terms of the kind of situation they dealt with. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, when you look at the arguments that are being made about how they should defend Army Group Center, this is a map from the German official history. And what's interesting about it is that you see the difference between the kind of structures that come to play that Hitler had decided to implement after his experiences in December of 1941 and January of 1942, when he basically took command of the army, when Brauchitsch leaves and certain commanding officers are sacked, his defense in place, the whole controversy about that. He decides to essentially create Festungsplatzes, which included basically fortress areas, which included the Besk, Orsha. They're circled here on this map, and Borisov, and Bubrisk, and Mogilev. And so these were fortresses that were to be defended. So the last divisions were allocated to that task before the onset of the Soviet offensive. Now, in contrast, the Army Group Center had actually wanted to withdraw, launch a strategic withdrawal. They would have shortened their lines about 160 kilometers. And that was the line they wanted to withdraw to, behind the Berezina, way before the operation occurred. And something equivalent to the Germans withdrawing in 1917, the Hindenburg line, when they withdrew and shortened their lines on the Western Front. But that was the line that they wanted to do. And this, of course, was the subject of command debates that were basically won by Hitler. He did not want them to do that. And remember, here, this area, you'll see in this German sign here, Partisans. This area, of course, by June 20th, 1944, there are 117 partisan units of different types, different strengths, operating in the rear of Army Group Center, numbering approximately 143,000 men and women, and probably boys. That includes, of course, the famous Belsky brothers, the film Defiance. But there's this constant, and the war that they're waging against the Germans are waging against them, is extraordinarily brutal, marked by civilian slaughter by the Germans and a ruthless response by the partisans. Certainly, I think the best movie ever done on this whole aspect of this war is the 𝐁𝐚𝐠𝐫𝐚𝐭𝐢𝐨 movie done in the 1980s by a former World War II veteran, actually. And anyway, so that's the sector there. Now, how the Germans operating in terms of their armor formations in this situation. Now, I just wanted to get some statistics out about production. It was a lot cheaper to construct a Sturmgeschütz SP gun, about 82,000 Reichmark, as opposed to 103,000 for a Panzer IV and 250,000 Reichmark for a Tiger and 117,000 Reichmark for a Panther tank. And when one looks at the kind of debates that they're having about the Panthers and the Tigers, there's plans. If you look at the production history of the Panther and the Tiger, there are plans to create these kind of weapon systems starting in the late 30s into the outbreak of the war. But of course, when they confront the problem of dealing with a KB-1 tank and the T-34 tank on the Eastern Front in 1941, there's this acceleration of producing these new weapon systems. Now, one of the problems with the Panther tank is that the Panther tank, when it's first produced, is there are problems with the engines. There's problems with the life expectancy, the service of it. And surprisingly, one of the interesting issues to me is the difference between the German use of traction suspension, which was something that, I sort of was aware of. Again, we don't have Steve here because I could certainly ask him to talk about this at great length. But the traction suspension problem, they had multiple. It was basically gave them greater over the ground mobility. But what would happen, of course, is you had a substantial breakdown problem. So you'll see later is that many of the tanks that are lost to the Allies and the Soviets in the war are due to problems of maintenance. They're simply have broken down, or they might have run out of gas or whatnot. But basically, there's a lot of problems with maintenance, and that is an issue of the Panther, particularly as it works in at the time of the Battle of Kursk, and then the Tiger comes in earlier. The first Tigers are actually Tigers captured around Leningrad in that period of time. But the Tiger, of course, is another issue. The problem of sending the Tiger into action. They had to modify it to go on the railroads, which was essentially the key to strategic mobility to the Germans at the time when they'd shift troops back and forth. And so the Tiger, when you had the Tiger could not come off the actual train itself. It had to then be its tracks had to be put back on. They had to take off the outer wheels of the tank itself. So there's all these interesting questions, but of course we know how extremely combat effective they were against the Russians. Now, another aspect of this is the question of the armor on these tanks. Again, to an audience like this, we're very familiar with these things. The Germans, of course, had superior armor in the front, in the Tiger and the Panther. Actually, the Mark IV also should be put in because that was really the workhorse of the German armor at this time, particularly the long-gunned 75 millimeter weapon that they put on the Mark IV after 41, 42. And there's a little fun thing I discovered here. This was from a cartoon book that was used to train Tiger tank crewmen. It was called Tigerspiel, and here is a Tigerfiebel. And this is some of the diagrams they had that were shown to the crew. I picked this, of course, because this gives you a good sense of the problems they had with all these different wheels on each side of the tank. The question of keeping them in action. This is other pages that are devoted to the maintenance. Now, here's a organization chart of a Panzer division in 1944. The main point here to make is you have a Panzer regiment that's mainly composed of Panzer IVs, but they were beginning to also include Panther battalions also. And many of the units on the Eastern Front, when Operation Bagration kicks off, a number of their battalions are back in Germany being re-equipped with Panther Mark V's, Panther tanks. They're not there. And here, of course, is their motorized or mechanized regiment. Different. The Wehrmacht was less well equipped than the SS divisions, but the SS divisions, it's not uniform at all. Them were that well equipped. Some of them were terribly equipped compared to the Wehrmacht units. And this is just as you can see, this is one of these German maps, structural charts showing the strength of these divisions in 1944. And the battalion size was essentially the Panthers. They had about 96 Panthers in a battalion. And keep that in mind. These of course will become very important when we see how the operation breaks out. Now, this is the distribution of armor throughout the Eastern Front on June 1st. So you can see this is Steve. Steve's not here. I would, if Steve was here, I'd say, okay, Steve, take it away, man. But he's not. So, and this is from his book, Tanks of Bagration. So here you have you can see the Panther IVs. Panzer IVs dominate the equipment on all the different units, but you can see there's only one division really up here, the 20th Panzer Division, which is the immediate reserve division of Army Group Center. It will be joined in the fighting by this division, the 5th Panzer Division, which is only composed of Panzer IVs. But you can see that the size of these divisions are not particularly reminiscent of what we saw, let's say, on June 22nd, when they had about 150, 160 runners. So here's a Panzer division composed of about 56 tanks. This is the Ferdhall, this is a Panzer Grenadier division, which had a pretty small number of tanks. They're involved in Army Group Center. Most of the concentration of armor was in the area of Army Group Northern Ukraine. This is where the Maskarovka deception operations of the Soviets had been most successful. So the 56th Panzer Corps had been shifted from Army Group Center, and most of these divisions, a certain percentage of divisions here were part of that corps that was basically being set aside to launch a preemptive attack against the Russians. Now, the fighting on the Dnieper basically had crippled the divisions. Remember, we're not doing, we'll probably get into this later at another time. We're going to talk about the operations from January to April and May. But there was a whole series of attacks that were, and this includes the Korsun Pocket and all these kind of operations. They were mounted against the Germans, and there was tremendous losses on the part of the Soviets, several times greater than the Germans. Yet the Germans, of course, were attrited. So at this time, they had 15 Panzer divisions, 7 Panzer Grenadier divisions, and 6 Tiger battalions of the Eastern Front in general. And you can see the steady reduction as operations begin of the amount of strength they have, including by August 1st of 1944, they're down to 2,000 tanks. And they get more Tigers, but look at the Panther totals. They get really decimated by the attacks by the Soviets. Now, the majority of the units, this is basically what I just showed you. Only 8 of the Panzer divisions had the Panther Battalion at the start of Operation Bagration. So they averaged only about 60 tanks, or about a third of their authorized strength. So the importance of the the assault guns is extremely important. The Totenkopf and Viking division, most of the Waffen-SS divisions had been deployed to the west. For the point that was raised in the previous talk we had on Bagration, Hitler's strategy was to basically inflict a decisive defeat on Overlord and then shift the forces eastwards. The amount of armor in Italy was maybe 200 tanks at the most. Again, most of the armor strength is concentrated in the west to prepare against Overlord. Now, there are organizational improvisations that are made by Hitler. And this is the creation of 12 armored brigades after D-Day and after Bagration. And they were basically composed mainly of Panther tanks. But this experiment sort of was an emergency experiment to deal with the onslaught in the west and the east. And most of those armor brigades were folded into panzer divisions by the fall of 1944, when there's that brief respite where they're reorganizing, where they can mount the Ardennes offensive in December against the Allies in the West. And so, but that's something to keep in mind. They were improvising their use of armor. The Tiger tanks, of course, were kept separate. They're in separate Abteilung battalions. And that's important to keep in mind. They're not integrated. And then you had, of course, the question of the assault guns. Now, the assault guns are the main, and actually they dominate to some extent the armor fighting vehicles that the Germans have on the Eastern Front. And they tended to be optimally deployed in company strength. When you read the manuals of the Sturmgeschütz units, they talk about, remember the Sturmgeschütz, the actual SP gun it's not like a tank. It's basically designed to attack the accompanying as an anti-tank weapon, to knock out, it was basically had a lot of HE rounds, and it could of course take out artillery. But when it was deployed in tandem with armor formations, they tended to put the Sturmgeschütz units in an assault in sort of an overwatch position for the tanks. And they'd be used to, because they had the 75 millimeter the guns, they had the range to knock out many Soviet tanks. And even they could knock out T-34-85s at a range of 1,000 meters or so. So they were very important for the defense that the Germans would mount, the Sturmgeschütz brigades. This is the amount of Sturmgeschütz brigades on the Russian front. You can see mainly the Sturmgeschütz 3 and 4 predominate, and the earlier versions, had basically, they would tend to be put into lesser fronts by this point. But you can see again the losses that they suffer from June to September, and some of these brigades are wiped out in the Operation Bagration. By Army Group, there were of course a lot of Sturmgeschütz brigades in Army Group Center. In fact, there were obviously more of them than there were armor fighting, tanks. There's only one Panzer division that's in reserve, the 20th, when the offensive begins in June. The infantry, the other anti-tank weapons that were deployed of varying types. Basically, the Germans had learned a lot from their fighting. What I'm not including in here is the introduction of the Panzerfaust, the Panzerstreck, which now is coming in along with the small arm that is increasingly being developed. Hitler did not use the MP-44 and put it into production the way he might have, because it was a new weapon. But nevertheless, the ability of the infantry in the German army to deal with tank fighting at a platoon and company level was way enhanced in this period. And you can see that by the kind of losses that the Soviets suffer in their armor attacks. But nevertheless, we had various Panzerjäger companies, flak companies, Sturmgeschütz companies. These were attached to infantry divisions. The operational tank strength from east to west, you can see that. Look at this bottom number here. Now, this is May. Most of the armor that's coming in stream is being concentrated to fight against the anticipated landing and defeat it. And so you can see that now this changes to some extent in August because they have to send reinforcements. But nevertheless, you can see that right there is a pretty good illustration of, and concretely about, the German strategy. It is concentrate the armor in the west, defeat the Allied landing, and then shift them to the east. The Army Group strength by Army Group. The Panzer II is no longer really there. The 3 is sort of lesser as an armor vehicle, but the Panzer IV is the main armor vehicle they have in their divisions. You can see that the amount of strength in Army Group Center is mainly assault guns, Sturmgeschützes, 404 as opposed to 489 armor vehicles in general. Most of the equipment is concentrated in Army Group North Ukraine, which is where they expect the offensive. Less numbers are in Army Group Southern Ukraine, and then Army Group North certainly has less numbers than both Army, more or less, even less than Army Group Center. But keep those numbers in mind. The amount of tanks, amount of Tigers. Look, no Panther tanks at all in Army Group Center when the assault begins. Now, these are just little comments about other armor that's there. These are heavy tank destroyer units. These are basically the Hornets, Nashorn. These are 88s mounted on Panzer IV chassis. There wasn't that many of them on the Eastern Front in general. And then you have Hungarian units that were used in the Operation Bagration operation. This was a armored unit. The Hungarians even had Tiger tanks. Model gave them Tiger tanks, and this division that they had was essentially reinforced by Tiger tanks, Sturmgeschützes, and the latest model, the H model of the Panzer IV. But the Romanians are in the field too. There's a cavalry division, a Hungarian cavalry division that's used in the area around the Val-Chandemis. And just to end this part of the armored discussion, the Romanians have a armored division that is essentially destroyed in August of 1944 in the fighting. And the Finns are there too. Now, this is an interesting analysis of what were the actual casualties of foreign fighting vehicles. So you see that the armed forces losses of Germans in the summer of 44. Here are very heavy losses in the Sturmgeschütz. They lose 900, almost 900 SP guns in July. And look at these casualty losses for the month of July: 2,000 tanks as the offensive begins. And we're not only talking about the offensive of Bagration, we're talking about the loss of the Miss. All the operations, Army Group North also is in that picture. Here's the losses in August. Front is tending to stabilize way westwards, but nevertheless the losses are very high. 4,000 armed vehicles between June and September of 1944. And again, their strength by Army Group is particularly, keep that in mind, this is as the battle starts. So Army Group Center only has 579. Now, this is an interesting look at how the losses were calculated by Soviets. So and these are armies, this is the Lvov operation. Minsk, 5th Guards tank army is involved in the taking of Minsk. Lvov, Shandamis, Lublin, another operation they mount. One of these. Remember, they're launching a whole bunch of staggered offensive operations at this period of time, and you can see that most of the losses are due to gunfire, German gunfire. Mining losses not particularly high. Aviation losses not particularly high. Although this can vary, because remember, we're talking about it again is a situation where the Red Air Force, that's a whole other story to go into. I will not do that. There's others who are far more qualified to do that. We'll have Ilya Grinberg come in and maybe Christopher Bergstrom at some point come in to talk about this. But the Soviet Air Force had total supremacy of the air. And it was funny, I was talking to Colonel Glantz about this, and we chanced upon a book 2 weeks ago that actually showed pictures of German convoys shot up by the Red Air Force. And he pointed out to me that he had not seen that many pictures like that in the years he was doing work. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the technical aspects of this. A lot of these pictures and stories are known to us. The one thing to say about Panzer production is that Hitler demands it doubled in September 1942 to about 8% of production. He establishes different goals. But even then, Soviet tank production is 5 times higher. And I'm not even talking about American tank production or British tank production. Because remember, American tank production is starting to go off the charts. The Soviets will get Lend-Lease equipment. They include British tanks, American tanks. They equip them and use them in 1941, 1942, 43, 44. There are units that are equipped with Shermans in the Red Army. They still use Matildas and Valentines, less so. But they're there. Those units at that point, the British tanks, if they're still being used, tend to be in independent regiments. They're used to reinforce in different divisions, which Alex will show in a few minutes. Now, Guderian had become the inspector of the Panzer forces. So the Panther arrives on the Russian front in the summer of 1943. But the initial model, the A model, did not perform as well as they thought. And so the new tanks that were coming out, most of them were assigned to the Western Front as opposed to the Eastern Front. So when you look at the composition of units on the Western Front, most of the Panther tanks, they're getting the bulk of the new Panther production. After Bagration, the newer Panther models are then shifted eastwards. The G's, the H's and other tank models are shifted eastwards. But that's an interesting little subtlety I did not realize until I saw this. Now, you also have a question of Panzer IVs. Panzer IVs, Panzer IV H is the long range Panzer tank with the 75 millimeter. These are actually calculations by the Soviet Army about the relative strength of these kind of vehicles. You can see the T-34 and the Panzer IV were more or less considered equal in capability to them. The T-34-85 was given slight edge over the Panzer IV, but the Panther was considered twice as effective as a vehicle. Here's the Tiger. Now the Tiger comes in, and basically the way that the Soviets solve this problem from their point of view is they bring in the JS2. Basically, they put the JS2 tank, an armament with a 122 millimeter round, and that can more or less take out a Tiger tank and even a Tiger II tank. The readiness rates of different tanks on the front, you can see the Germans had good maintenance rates for the Sturmgeschütze as the offensive begins, and the Panthers. That tends to break down as operations continue. Now, let me move to finally just some comments about the Sturmgeschütze. So this is a production chart of the various SP guns. You can see how the increased production, there's monthly rates in 42, 43, and you can see how it increasingly becomes important in the German army. This is the Sturmgeschütze with the 75 long range weapon, and you can see how important it is in 43, 44. Look at those production rates before Bagration. They keep on going up, and then of course they begin to diminish in 45, of course. And here are the numbers of the Sturmgeschütze H's and the 4s. The H had 105 millimeter howitzers in it. And here's the Sturmgeschütze 4, not that many. They start coming off the line in January 44. So the main assault gun to be met is the Sturmgeschütze 3. Now, let's turn to the Organizational Army Group Center. This is a chart showing the actual structure of Army Group Center. I'm not going to. I'll go into greater detail with that in a minute. Basically, there were various. You can see here. These are divisions that they had in reserve. Let me just blow this up a little bit. So these are security divisions: the 288, the 707s, 207s, 201st. These are security divisions fighting against partisans in the rear. These are the core from Army Group North. They're sort of directly north of the 3rd Panzer Army, which is the first army on the left, if you will, that the Germans have. And this is the 6th Corps, which is the corps that gets hit north of Vitebsk by the Soviets. As you can see, it's has an SP, Sturmgeschütze Brigade here for reinforcements. The 53rd Corps was in Vitebsk itself, and it had a lot of static artillery. Later on, we'll show that. Probably not today, but there's maps that show the deployment of artillery in Vitebsk. And it's supported by a SP brigade, Sturmgeschütze Brigade. The only armor division in reserve is the 20th. Remember, they are being subject to a very sophisticated deception operation that makes them deploy a whole Panzer Corps to the Army North Ukraine sector. And that was deliberate on the part of the Soviets. This is the formation for the 4th Army, which is directly south of 3rd Panzer Army. And this is the 12th Corps and the 39th Panzer Corps, which you can see is composed of divisions. And this is a Panzer Grenadier Division, the 18th, which has basically the Sturmgeschütze in its unit. And I put here the 2nd Army is a army that's directly. This is actually under Army Group North, Army Group North Ukraine. Its core are directly adjacent to the Ninth Army, which gets hit in the south by the Soviets. And here are units that essentially are important because we'll see them get deployed as reinforcements to Army Group North. It includes a cavalry division, Hungarian 2nd Division. Here's a Sturmgeschütz Brigade attached to this corps, the 8th Corps. That's one of the corps that gets affected by the dismemberment of the front. And here is the 9th Army, which is the army on the south that gets hit. And this is the 35th Corps. This is the 41st Corps. And here is the 55th Corps. And these are the corps that get basically, all these forces get and essentially enveloped and destroyed by the Russians in the offensive operations that are mounted. This is Army Group Center, and General Field Marshal Bush is the commander. This is a picture of him. Let me reduce that a little bit. This is Field Marshal Bush. He's the commander. Let me just go into his background to some extent. He's an infantry officer. Stayed in the Weimar, in the army of the Reichswehr during the Weimar Republic. He becomes a division commander in 1936. During the invasion of Poland, he's a corps commander. And by 1940, he's a commander of an army, the 16th Army. He led that during the Battle of France and the invasion of the Soviet Union. He is a field marshal at this point in time, and he is given command of Army Group Center in October of 1943. Now, he is also someone who is very loyal to Hitler. And when you get into the actual fighting, this is a little bit more. He basically will replace General Kluge, who was injured in a vehicle accident. Kluge, of course, will be eventually in the Western Front. I believe he committed suicide after July 20th. He's implicated in the plot. But the division, when he takes command of the force, there's 54 divisions under his control. And that is a huge force that he has under his control, including about 6 Hungarian and 5 Panzer divisions. The amount of troops that he controls in June has reduced itself to 38. So most of those divisions have been shifted south to Army Group North Ukraine, or was shifted during the fighting against the offensives in 1943 in the south. He had to contend with different attacks by the Red Army. We're not going to do it this session. Another session perhaps we'll devote to explaining that. Those were a whole series of attacks that the Russians learned a great deal from, and they were out to basically break through and achieve a strategic decision. They did not. But he was the commander during those defensive operations up to April of 1944. Now, they were also at this point in time, this is this whole question of Polotsk, Medvedsk, Orsha, Mogilev, and Bublyask. These are the areas which they basically concentrated on as fortress Festungsplatzes. Now, got kids coming in there. Now, the Army Group Center, as I said, had 38 divisions. Army Group North Ukraine had 35 German and 10 Hungarian, including 8 Panzer divisions. Army Group South Ukraine and North Ukraine had 18 Panzer Grenadier and Panzer divisions against only 3 in Army Group Center. So the air support was completely distributed very differently. Army Group Center basically had only about 60 to 100 fighters when the offensive began. And they were confronted by 4,000 to 5,000 Red Air Force fighters. In fact, when you go into the whole question of the the issue of Maskarovka, the Soviets had quite intelligently been able to mask their deployment of air armies. So the Germans thought that 5 air armies were deployed elsewhere, whereas the Soviets had been able, through deception operations, to concentrate several air armies quite successfully. And while it was picked up by the local army intelligence, which we'll get into perhaps in another session, that was not put into the mix of decision making. Now, the various corps, this is the corps north of Army Group Center. This is commanded by, this is a whole bunch of work to look at who these German officers are. But here's the 3rd Panzer Army. This is the first corps that's directly adjacent to the 3rd Panzer Army, which is the most northern army of Army Group Center. This is the army of Army Group North, our 16th Army. This is on their left flank. This is the army commanded by Reinhardt, the 3rd Panzer Army. And Reinhardt was a Panzer officer. He was essentially, he was indicted at Nuremberg. This is a picture of him at Nuremberg when he was indicted for war crimes. That had to do with the various operations that they mounted against civilians. In some of these areas, Bubresk, for example, 20,000 Jews were killed, along with thousands and thousands of Soviet civilians. And Reinhardt was indicted as a war criminal after the war. But in terms of his background, he's someone who commanded an armored division in the invasion of Poland. He commanded the 41st Panzer Corps and another Panzer Corps during the invasion of Barbarossa, and he was essentially given command of the 3rd Panzer Army during Operation Typhoon. So he retained command of that army for quite a long time. Here's Reinhardt, and this is this is interesting. This is something to keep in mind. This term in German basically means maneuverability. So one of these divisions in reserve, he had an infantry division reserve that had about 75% mobility. The 95th Division, that will be important in the fighting as it develops. That division is at the northern part of 3rd Panzer Army, and it's immediately thrown into battle as a reserve division to stem the breakthrough. This is the 6th Corps, and what I found, the source, let me see if I can blow this up a little bit. I'd never seen pictures of these different commanders, these different division commanders. So this is the 6th Corps of the 3rd Panzer Army, and these are the different division commanders. Again, the mobility rates are listed here. The artillery is not completely mobile. 75% of it is in this division, the 197th, 75% in the 299th, and 256th, the artillery is 50% mobile. And that'll be important when they get surrounded, how they can actually break out. This is the 9th Corps of this division, of this army. And you can see the same thing. Here's the division commanders, Meltzer, and here is this other division commander, Palmberg of the Corps Abteilung. The Corps Abteilung was essentially an ersatz unit composed of remnants of 3 infantry divisions. And here's the Corps Commander Wuthman of that particular unit. This is the situation for the 53rd Corps. This corps will be basically wiped out by the Soviets. Gollwitzer is the corps commander. Hitler is the commander of the 206th Division. This division will be ordered by Hitler to stay and fight. That's a whole other issue to get into as we get into the flow of operations, which I don't think we'll do today, but we will go through this pretty carefully. The 246th is another division with 75% mobility. And here you have these Luftwaffe divisions. The 6th and the 4th, they were part of the Corps. And I know that's a whole big subject that people have written a lot about. But those are that's essentially the 3rd Panzer Army. Now, the 3rd Panzer Army was deployed basically along a 150-kilometer front. It consisted of 10 divisions, 10 infantry divisions and 2 Luftwaffe divisions and several Sturmgeschütz brigades. Plus, there were different regiments in reserve, Army Reserve, operating against the partisans. It had 165,000 troops, 1,300,000 guns, and 80 tanks, 80 assault guns when the offensive begins. More to say about it, the density of forces were pretty thick on the ground. I don't have this map right here, but you'll see the amount of fighting they had around Videbsk was quite intense. They had a tremendous concentration of German artillery. The defenses were basically 3 systems of double trenches, one behind the other, to a depth of about 6 kilometers. That, of course, is the zone that the Soviets would essentially lay in their bombardment in incredible fury. Now, here's the Fourth Army to the south of it. This is commanded by General 𝐁𝐚𝐠𝐫𝐚𝐭𝐢𝐨𝐧. This is a picture of General 𝐁𝐚𝐠𝐫𝐿𝐵𝐭𝐢𝐨𝐧. This army is also annihilated in this operation. These are the different corps commanders. The 12th Corps commander. And again, the interesting, this Panzergrenadier division, its maneuverability rates are only 40%. So while, of course, you have these divisions, Panzergrenadier division, its maneuverability for its artillery is only 40%. The infantry division next to it had greater adjacent to the 267th, had, again, this number here is quite interesting. This is actually from German estimates before the operation begins. This is the other corps. It's to the south. This is actually confronting the Soviets directly. The 27th Corps, 28th Corps, excuse me, and 27th Corps. They mislabel it here. This guy Volkers is the commander. And here's a division reserve. This is a division reserve that's to be used. That also gets eaten up right away in the breakthrough, the 14th Infantry Division. This is the 25th Panzergrenadier Division. Again, look at this. The maneuverability rates of its artillery are only 60%. They'll lose, as you will see, they will lose this artillery is abandoned in the encirclement operations, and none of it gets out. Very few, very insignificant numbers get out. This is the other corps. This is the 39th Panzer Corps. This is composed of 4 infantry divisions. Here's the corps commander, Martinik. And this is Hossbach. Now, Hossbach, of course, Hossbach is the famous Hossbach memorandum. He's a division commander. You guys will remember the Hossbach memorandum is used at Nuremberg. This is where Hossbach, there was a meeting Hitler had where he talked about his war aims. And this is General Hossbach, who was that guy, the Hossbach memorandum. It was used as a major source of indictment against the Germans at Nuremberg. But again, the maneuverability of these divisions varies. Okay. They're not static divisions of the type we see in Normandy along the coast. They do have maneuverability. They're sort of, not grade C or D divisions, but they're grade B. But nevertheless, they don't have full mobility to move their artillery around. 𝐁𝐚𝐠𝐫𝐴𝐵𝐭𝐢𝐨𝐧 had fought he'd been a division commander. He'd worked with the Italians. So he was assigned to the Italian army when the Italian 8th Army was destroyed by the Soviets in the Stalingrad campaign. And then he was given command of a corps, the 12th Army Corps, and then he took command of Army Group Center in June. So he'd only been, command of the 4th Army in June of 1944. So he'd only been an Army commander for a short period of time. And anyway, he survives the war. This is the question of the stand and fight issue of Hitler. Now, again, I think there needs to be new work done on this. This whole Feldplatz fortified area issue. If one is thinking about the fighting going on around the Ukraine right now, it's pretty clear that the commanders, certainly those Ukrainian commanders, in terms of their ability and their willingness to trade space instead of being static in their defense. I mean, you could say Bakhmut perhaps was a static defense to some extent, but they have been shrewd in giving up ground and withdrawing when it makes no sense to continue and when they can't possibly defend these operations. Unfortunately, today I don't think we have David Smith. David Smith is an officer in the International Legion fighting Ukraine, and it's too bad he's in here today because he wanted to come. But this is, of course, an issue. All this, by the way, all this work has to be looked at. This is all. I mean, it sort of was an eye opener to me to see how much work could really be done on this. Dimbleby does a good job. I give him he does a good job. It's a popular history. It does a good job. It basically emphasizes the color of these kind of operations with these horrible, renditions of the savage barbarity of the Eastern Front War. But again, that kind of work, that's all. It's a whole big area to go into. And here's the Ninth Army. Ninth Army is the small Southern Army. This is commanded by Hans Jordan. He is all these guys are World War I veterans. His army is here's Panzertruppen von Bormann. Bormann will take command of the army from Jordan. He's relieved of command on the 26th of June as his army collapses. So Bormann is given command of the army after 26th June. They're deployed in the area, basically the Pripyat marshes. So they are taken by surprise by the Soviets, which we will see. And here is the cast of characters, the various divisions. Again, the maneuverability rates in these areas are actually higher. This is the 35th Corps. This is the 41st Panzer Corps, all infantry divisions. And again, the mobility rates of these units actually are pretty high. They do withdraw as they're being attacked. And here's the 55th Corps. It has a division reserve here, a security division that's involved in counter-partisan warfare. They get employed immediately as a backup force. And these are divisions here these are all divisions that you'll see the Schwerpunkt of the Soviets. Maybe not today, but we'll get into that later. The 9th Division is defending a 220-kilometer front, has about 175,000 men, 1,600 field guns, and the overall strength of the whole army group is 1 million troops. This is Soviet. Keep this in mind. It's from the Soviet General Staff, so take that with a grain of salt. 7,000 field guns, 20 anti-aircraft. All this, now 800 tanks we know is way over. Because the numbers we have are far, far less than that. And 1,000 to 1,300 airplanes, way, way over estimates. Now, the strengths, this is again, this is from Niepold, Lieutenant General Niepold. He was a senior staff officer in one of the Panzer divisions that intervenes in this. I actually met General Niepold in Garmisch in 1987 at a conference on Operation Barbarossa. So his book I recommend. Paul Adair was still alive. Paul Adair, I believe his father was the commander of the Guards Armor Division in World War II. And he wrote a book about Army Group Center. But nevertheless, this is a foxhole strength. Look at this. Foxhole strength of these divisions on the 9th Army, 1,300 troops. All right, keep in mind the Soviets are going to come after these. Some cases, they'll have a division of infantry coming after a regiment in these divisions. So this gives you a sense of, the level. The deception operations really work very well. They're able to concentrate tremendous force against the areas to break through. And the density of men per kilometer, look at this. For this course, 48 men per kilometer. Extremely low. 55th, 26 men per kilometer. And, again, I know any of us who've read Soviet staff studies of operations, they're really into, the material schlacht of war. But still, you can see that they will tailor their attacks to break through these areas with overwhelming strength. And the Fourth Army, just to conclude this part, they're defending a 225-kilometer sector. They have 10 infantry divisions, 8 infantry divisions, 2 motorized divisions. And again, these are a little inflated, these numbers. The men, I don't know if they're taking the 𝐁𝐚𝐠𝐫𝐚𝐽 table of organization equipment numbers to calculate these numbers, but nevertheless, we're talking about significant numbers of troops. Now, here is the Second Army to the south. This is the army of Army Group North Ukraine, commanded by Walter Weiss. He's, again, another veteran division commander, a corps commander, and becomes an army commander in February of 1943. That's Weiss. Another one of these, guys who has extensive infantry combat from the First World War. These are the different commanders of security divisions that are deployed. This is the Panzer Division. Now, the 20th Division and the 5th Division are the most important divisions to keep in mind. These are the divisions that actually will try to mount and are unsuccessful in mounting counterattacks against what they are confronted with by the Russians. These are the various commanders. This is the Festerplatz commander, Bobutsk, Mogilev. They actually designated commanders to command the fortress areas. And what's the defeat of Army Group Center? Like, what is accomplished by the Soviet operation? They tear a 100-kilometer gap in the lines of the Germans. They basically knock out. Look at this. Fourth Army loses most of its strength. 130,000 men are lost of 165,000. Third Panzer Army loses 10 divisions, and the Ninth Army escapes with about 10 to 15,000 men. They lose about 350,000 troops, of which 150,000 are captured. Large numbers of these will die. Many of them, we know the Russians, of course, the Germans treated their prisoners more savagely than the Russians did, but the Russians were not any great example of the Geneva Convention. They will suffer, lose about 270,000, 75,000 will be dead. Now, just some issues before I turn it over to Alex. There, as I mentioned before, you will have the introduction in this campaign. And they've been introduced earlier, but you'll have, we know that the Germans developed far better personal infantry level anti-tank weapons than the Allies did during the war. And here is the Faustpatron. That's the predecessor of the Panzerfaust. They were more commonly known as the Faustpatron II, which is the Panzerfaust. And this, of course, could penetrate the side of a tank. And it was used quite effectively against the Allies and quite effectively against the Russians. The Panzerfaust had different numbers that they produced. The Panzerfaust 100. And here's the Panzerschreck. Now, the Panzerschreck, of course, was a much more effective anti-tank weapon. And just to end, the Sturmgewehr 44, the model for the AK-47, that was coming into production. And I think a couple 100,000 were produced in the war. But again, that would have been a real game changer at the squad level if you'd had massive deployments of that. Now, the rest of this I will save for another time. This is just to get further into some of the other organizations of the German army. But at this point, I will turn it over to Alex so he can get into the issue of the Soviet army. What I'm passing by here are just some more interesting aspects. I'll show this right here. So here is this shows you the concentration in the west of the Panzer Force construction before D-Day. And you can see that the Germans, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Panzer and Panzer Grenadier divisions, are concentrated in the west to defeat the Allied landings. This is the number that is on the east on the 31st of May. And as you can see, let me just go through this. So this is on May 1st. This is the strength of the Panzer units on the east. Again, we went over this earlier. This is just before Bagration. You can see here's the Army Group Southern Ukraine. That will eventually, these units will be taken from Army Group South Ukraine, sent north, and then that will contribute to the debacle that occurs in September when the Soviets attack Romania, the 𝐁𝐚𝐠𝐫𝐚𝐭𝢢𝐨 operations. And here's Army Group North Ukraine. You can see that the different divisions. Here's a Abteilung, a Tiger tank battalion, the 7th Panzer Division. Look at the strength. Not particularly large. 47 runners. Here you got 60 runners. The 6th Panzer Division, 90, about 100, 91 runners. And then you have different Tiger tank battalions here. But this is the area where they expect they're going to be attacked. The Viking Division, Panzer, they have a lot of Panzer tanks. But so the Army Group North has but again we get back to this question of Army Group Center. And the 20th Panzer Division is only 56 tanks. All right. And I compare that, of course, with what I just showed you here of the strength in the West. And so, the Germans were clearly, as I said again, this was their strategy. We went over it last time. That's what their desire and hope was to do. And that's just a repetition. This is just the status of tanks on the Eastern Front. From May of 44 to March 45, you can see the shift in time. May, just focus on this is operational versus needing repairs. And you can see, look at this by the end of the war, they're just running out of spare parts. The Germans are running increasingly out of spare parts. Their maintenance levels just decline. This is just repeating what I said earlier about the structure. The artillery is interesting to keep in mind here. Each of theoretically, it should have 12 Wasp SP 105 millimeter SP guns, 6 Hummels, 105 millimeter howitzers. So there's all this balance here, but they could not match the attrition they were going through. There's all these different detachments. These are these Abteilung formations I was referring to. And those are basically, burnt out divisions created as regimental task groups that are put under the control of a task force. And in that case of the situation we're talking about, Army Group Detachment D is composed of the remnants of 3 divisions. This is just quickly the Panzer II is no longer a factor by May of 44. Look at that, the amount of production. The inventory is way down. The Panzer 38, that's the Czech tank they used in the beginning of the war. That's way down too. And no production's going on in that tank. The Panzer III production is essentially declined dramatically by June, July. But here, of course, is the Panzer IV, which we can see is production is going up. Losses, look at losses as opposed to inventory. So they're actually losing more in that period of time than they're producing. Here's the Panzer V. Again, losses are more than they are producing. Particularly at September 44, these dramatic losses, I guess, a combination of the breakout of the West, the operations of the East combining together to weaken their armor forces. Here is the numbers for the Tigers, Tiger 1s. Again, losses. quite extraordinary in terms of the amount that they're able to put in there by the end of the war, March of 45. Here are Panzer IIs. A Panzer II is quite unwieldy, as we know, and that's a whole separate kettle of fish to talk about. They basically the key takeaway from this is that the Soviets are able to replace their terrible losses. I mean, by 43, they 2 million killed and missing. 5.5 million wounded or sick who were later returned to duty. They are able to replace these terrible losses. The Germans are not. The German infantry division at this point in time is also reduced, as I said. Some divisions still have a triangular structure, but they have 3 regiments with 2 battalions each. Most of them have 2 regiments with 3 battalions each or 2 battalions each. It depends. It just is a question of they're revising their TOE structure because they're just losing more and more troops. Their firepower, of course, increases. They are increasing it with, Thunderschrecks, the MG 42 as a machine gun. We know is better than the 34. I fired the 42, really good weapon. But again, you have this question of also mobility. They do not have the mobility that the Russians have. One interesting aspect about this offensive is the Russians are able to use quite effectively all those trucks they get from America. And they motorize their armor forces quite well. Now, the Storm Districts brigades, again, I've gone over this. Their force generation is, again, a problem. Now, I will not focus in that much about this. This is always, it's fun to sort of go through this because now I can sort of say, let's skip through this. But basically, they're running out of troops. And the point about this is more, I won't get into detail. This is the key thing to take away from everything I'm showing here is that they have tremendous resources. No doubt the Germans are creating new waves of units, but these units they're quite resilient about it, but they just are running out of troops. And the bad weather imposes a delay on operations in the spring of 44. But as I say, the Russians are able to maintain 6 million on the front, additional 5 million on other fronts. The Germans reach a peak of 12 million in 44, but drop to 9.7 in 45, 3.1 million on the Eastern Front in July 43. But by February 44, the number had dropped to 2.4 million. And here again, you cannot exclude the demands of the Western Front on what's going on here. So let me stop here and turn it over to Alex so he can talk about the Russian Front. And anybody, again, don't hesitate to jump in and interrupt us. Go on, Alex.
Okay, thanks, Jim. So we're going to look at kind of the other side now. The Soviet Red Army. We'll get into, structure of the different fronts, but, also tactics and operational art. All right. Okay. So here first we have, as best as we, understand it, the losses. Well, and of course, again, the strength. Remember, first Belarusian is kind of divided. So about half of it is going to be involved in the beginning part of Bagration, and then the rest kind of comes in as things move westwards, and kind of, the so-called Belarusian balcony, pushes in as, again, operations move westward. But here again, the official Soviet figures for losses, which again, they paid a heavy price again here, under 78,000 total killed and missing, 587,000 wounded, again, a total of over 765,000. See them broken down by pretty evenly distributed between, again, first, third, second Belarusian, which again is the smallest of the fronts, a little bit smaller, And of course, first Belarusian is the highest because, of course, it's the largest force, so that makes sense. And I guess they throw in, the Dnieper, like it's like a river flotilla. So again, discuss tactics. So at this point in the war, the Russians are really beginning to improve. At one point I asked David Glantz, forget which, one of the lectures he gave us at NIMAS, to compare again, where we, meaning the U.S. Army and the Brits were at the end of the war in terms of their operational and tactical art compared to the Soviets, especially in terms of armor. And he said, at the end of the war, basically, the Western Allies were basically where the Soviets were in 43 in terms of, effectiveness and, skill of their operations. But here again, so at this point in the war, Soviets are really beginning to, up their tactical and operational abilities. Again, things clearly worked better at Kursk. And again, this is going to combine in 44 to, despite, again, obviously, they say, infantry was a particular problem, but things are getting better. And, we'll see that pay off in Bagration with, the impressive advances and their ability to encircle major German forces. Okay. So, well, as we're seeing now in Ukraine again, Russians, again, go back to like the 17th and 18th century. Firepowers always begin, and artillery has always been their thing. So again, both again, using huge numbers, but also again, creating a huge overmatch, particularly again, we'll see in breakthrough centers, like, 10, 15 to 1 ratios of artillery. They'll have to put a tremendous amount of fire to, destroy German defensive positions or to suppress them so that, Soviet infantry could get in close and clear them. Okay, so we'll see the creation, again, of artillery divisions by this point in the war to concentrate a truly massive number of guns. And again, that'll be generally attached to the front level. But again, there are also separate artillery regiments and battalions down the line. And again, they're more and more connected and subordinated in some cases to, again, the infantry divisions in order to, set up the breakthrough operations, which will, not today, but we'll get into, some of these force ratios, and, we'll discuss a little bit about kind of, the pattern of, how long these suppression missions are going to be, how they organized the successive use of artillery to pound the German front lines, and what they targeted, how they did it, etc. So 50-minute bombardment, some points, 90 minutes in some cases. We'll get into that. Okay, at this point in the war, that created, in terms to make breakthroughs, assault detachments. Again, they were using increasing numbers of sappers integrated into these units. And again, these attacks would be accompanied more often by self-propelled guns, but also sometimes tanks would be slaved essentially to these units. Again, in some cases, we'll see with Bagration, they specifically trained to attack certain strongholds in preparation. They kind of did, an exercise before, so that again, a particular assault unit knew again, we're going to assault this, and they were kind of, create a mock-up of what they were supposed to attack, and so obviously they're much better prepared again for attacking the specific units that they're going after at this point. Here again, so at this point, they have so many tank brigades and SP gun regiments that they're generally attaching them to these specific breakthrough operations. And we'll see that they're going to focus specifically, they'll concentrate so-called breakthrough sector, really narrowing down again from the whole front of the whole army to, like a 20 or 30 kilometer area for a breakthrough, which again, they got much better, So again, kind of the Soviet version of the German Schwerpunkt, concentration of forces. So they're getting better at coordinating artillery and being able to move it from attacking one point to another. Also, again, using direct fire, again, tanks, SP guns, artillery. Again, as we say, more sappers, but also, again, flamethrower troops, use of shaped charges. So, again, this is a huge improvement and will be one of the reasons why Bagration will see many, especially in the first week, very successful penetration operations that, smash through the German lines and create the opportunity for the Soviet mobile forces to be injected into the line and to go deep. Okay, as Jim mentioned, again, the Soviet use of air power was really ramping up, and again, basically air supremacy over the front. We'll, later on we'll get into this. We've shown some of the numbers. Again, you can see it's an overwhelming. I think for Army Group Center, I think it was over 10-1 ratio of planes that the Soviets had versus the Germans. So here again is a German account here from a 9th Army report. It talks about, again, the improvements in Russian tactics. Again, no longer a broad front attack. Concentrated their forces on specific areas, again, these breakthrough sectors. Went first for good tactical ground, established a favorable position, and again, then put in, again, the mobile forces for the breakthrough once again the front had been penetrated. Okay, they kept German artillery from countering them, and again, made big use again of Soviet Red Air Force. Again, incessant bombing and strafing. That, and again here, 9th Army says this crippled their defensive power at the critical moment. Okay, so typically here, one of these operations, you have rifle company supported by a tank company and 2 or 3 assault guns. Tanks in front, 100 to 300 meters behind infantry, then 200, 400 meters behind them, the assault guns. Okay, so here you kind of get, equivalent force size for not just for Bagration, which again obviously is down here. Later, 𝐁𝐚𝐠𝐫𝐚𝐭𝐢𝐨𝐧 operation, which is also very successful. You can see again the increased number of mobile forces, and again at the front level, but also again Army attached here again. So in this case, again, the first Baltic Front had again their breakthrough army with 6 guards, and again it attached to it 1st Tank Corps. Again, 3rd Belarusian Front. Again, you can see here, 11th Guards Army attached 2nd Guards Tank Corps. Again, 3rd Belarusian Front had all, entirely cavalry mechanized group of 3rd Guards Mech Corps and Cavalry Corps, and 5th Guards Tank Army, which we'll talk a bit more about. And again, here, 1st Belarusian Front had here again attached to these armies again. In this case again, Army for the breakthrough, but again also attached 1st Guards Tank Corps, 3rd Army, 9th Tank Corps. So let's see how again each of those breakthrough operations had an attached tank corps at least in order to exploit. Again, here again similar situations here, kind of see set up for the later 𝐁𝐚𝐠𝐫𝐚𝐭𝐢𝐨𝐧 operation to the south, just as very successful as well. Okay, so again here I think late 42 is when the cavalry mechanized groups are introduced as kind of a adjunct to the tank armies. which at this point in the war, there are 6 of them. Yeah. Okay. So again, we'll see Soviets armored forces, much more willing again at this point to be really bold. We'll see in contrast to like operations in 43, where they sometimes tended to get, tendency to go like head to head with the German armor, and led to more losses for them, but also often meant they couldn't exploit things the way they could. At this point, they've learned, basically to go around the German armor. So even though the Germans inflict a lot of tank and self-propelled gun losses, again, Soviets are going to lose hundreds of tanks, but they essentially, it's like Sun Tzu, water finds its path. So just basically flow around, accept those counterattacks, but flow around them and, surround the German infantry, which again, they do quite successfully. All right, so here again, they note specifically here that again, the First Belarusian Front's cavalry mech group played a huge role in the encirclement of the forces around Minsk. Again, different forces will do it, for example, around Bobryansk, and Polotsk later on. Obviously, Vitebsk as well. Although again, Vitebsk is kind of easy since it was literally right on the front lines when the operation started. Okay, so again, general, better organized, equipped than before. And again, we'll get into Moskyrovka specifically quite a bit later. All right, so Soviets had also greatly improved their logistics by this point, and we'll see again their ability, for example, to bring more tanks forward in order to reinforce, again, their tank and mechanized units as they're getting obviously depleted, through mechanical breakdowns, but also through combat losses. I can see here again this German assessment that they've gotten much better, that they're actually able to kind of, often reinforce these mobile units so that they could, after 3 or 4 days, so that basically the advance could be maintained. Again, we're talking about some cases, 100 kilometers from the railheads. So again, this is, impressive accomplishment. Not, of course, as good as German equivalent, but again, the point is the Soviets are getting much closer to the German standard. And of course, they just have a hell of a lot more than the Germans do. Okay, they're better at maneuvering. And again, they have, this idea of forward detachments. It's kind of, early versions, to again what later on the kind of Soviet operational art of the operational maneuver group, again on a much smaller scale. So again, using these forward detachments to push forward and to pursue the enemy, to hunt them down. Okay, again, they've gotten much better, and again, they're integrating armor, but cavalry and mobile, trucks and so on to enable, better mobile operation, get into, the issues of Soviet truck production, American Lend-Lease, and, Studebakers and all that. Okay, so this is from Glantz's book, of course, on Soviet deep operations. We'll go through a few slides that he has kind of showing the evolution of organization at the division and front and army level. So again, here's a typical 44 period that are organized. Again, typical German defense with, again, Panzer Division in reserve, and again, a few infantry divisions in the main defensive belt. Concentration of artillery in a group, anti-tank reserve, mobile obstacles, again, the frontline infantry, and then again, the mobile force. And second echelon at this point, plus, anti-aircraft. Okay, so yeah, so each division has support group, artillery to support the first echelon. Then there's long range artillery. Engineer support had greatly increased. So again, more sappers, more flamethrowers, etc. Tank brigades, separate tank brigades and regiments, echelon with the front. And again, more support. Okay, so here's, same period, defensive structure of a division, divisions, how that would have broken down with the regiments, anti-tank groups, again, artillery reserve, corps level, etc. Okay, so so through 44, the Russians are going to run an increasing number of front-size offensive operations. Again, mentioned Yassi Kishinev, but again, there'll also be the very successful Love-Sandomierz operation, which follows back, it's a follow-on from Bagration. Again, of course, at that point, they will, basically make their way all the way to Warsaw. They'll also, liberate as well. Again, the Balkans, sweep the Romanians out of the war. Obviously, Finland's knocked out about the time Bagration starts. And again, they're going to overrun Bulgaria. They're going to start sweeping up through the Balkans. They'll get into Yugoslavia by the end of 44. And again, we'll be approaching, Germany itself. Okay, so here's Rifle Corps offensive formation. See here again, of course, glance always gives us, again, the depths, the sectors. You can see here, that's very important. Again, Soviets had that, okay, it's a certain point, basically, where we're going to introduce our mobile group. So again, the idea is, the infantry and the, breakthrough force, they make the whole, and basically then the Army mobile group is injected at the right time, a day or two into the operation, and again at the proper distance to go deep. So again, things are perfected, as Glantz says here. And again, at the end of the war, Soviets will do a lot of discussion, writing again about these, how they did it, and again the development of the theory of deep operations. Okay, so we can see here again, front, bit later in the war, 44 to 45. So again, these are how they organized for, again, they mentioned specifically here, again, the Manchurian operation, of course, which arguably is the most successful Soviet military operation of the whole war, as we shattered the army of, in Manchukuo, Kwantung army, totally came in from a direction from the west that they didn't think the Russians could deploy. And again, totally fooled them with Maskirovka, had, entire Soviet tank army smashing through the, running down. Of course, you can see it in the third part of, I'm thinking of the director's name, The Human Condition has some great scenes of, the Japanese soldiers getting, run down by Soviet tanks. Okay, so again, here, this is again, larger second echelon. But again, here at this point, again, 1 to 2 armies, but also cavalry mech group typically attached to a front for one of these penetration operations. Okay, so there's more. The Soviets have more, tanks and SP guns, of course, at the point, thanks to production. And so they're put them down at a level all the way down to the company. Okay. So again, typically, again, we'll see again, this applies, definitely to the early part of Bagration again. They would punch through on the first day and again, hit and punch through the second level of defense, second or third day. And then by that point, again, they're injecting, again, the mobile forces. So here's typical, shows also the kind of development again here from September to December for the mechanized corps. You can see the organization remains pretty similar. There's a slight decrease in the number of tanks, but you see again here they doubled, in the case of a Met Corps, the number of SP guns, and also doubled, see the number of guns and mortars attached. Also can see the strength went up a bit. Again, the actually interesting thing again is, a Met Corps actually we'll see as a higher strength than a tank corps, because again, specifically again, tank corps would not, sometimes there were only 2 brigades. Also again, with the tank corps, they, unlike, Met Corps always had a tank brigade attached, but we'll see tank corps doesn't necessarily have a mech brigade attached. Okay, so you can definitely see again a significant increase in the strength of the tank armies. Again, forget the theory. Again, you can see basically about a 50 tank increase, and also about a 50 additional guns, mortars for each of these. Again, with the strength remaining about similar. So here again is the equivalent with the tank corps. You can see again, the number of tanks remains the same, but the number of SP guns is doubled. With again, number of guns and mortars, actually in this case going slightly down. Also again, I'm not sure. I'm assuming this is call for calling in air support. They also, at this point, they add a aviation company to the tank corps. Okay, so here again, tank brigade, supposed to have 65 tanks each. Again, attached, self-propelled SP gun regiment, usually Su-67s. But also again here, they also attached generally again. So the additional again, the doubling of the SP guns was basically an additional Su-85 regiment, with again everything else again except for the addition of the aviation company being pretty much the same from again this tank corps to this tank corps. Okay. Oh wait, no, I think we showed that already. Okay. So again, it's kind of reinforced what we already said. Again, this is from Lance's book on deep operations. Okay, but here again, so the typical per day advances at this point in the war, 20 to 30 kilometers after you break through, and again, 50 to 60 kilometers possible for armored forces. With again, they plan for penetrations of between 400 to 500 kilometers by front, and again at the army size, 150 to 180 kilometers deep. Again, typical operations, and again we'll see obviously Bagration is going to be kind of the higher number of these. Again, that the front could be sustained for 15 to 20 days, 5 to 15 days at the army. Okay. So occasionally, again, they would put the tank armies in the first echelon, but typically, again, of course, and this again goes for the cavalry Met groups and other, that they were held back and again injected once the breakthrough took place. Holding back, So again, a tank corps could be expected to operate up to 180 kilometers deep. The tank army is up to 400 kilometers. Again, I mentioned the cavalry Met groups. So again, using them, to a depth of 25 to 40. Okay, so again, those would be, again, and we'll see again in Bagration, that's how they're used. Again, they're used kind of in, the front echelon with, again, of course, we have the 5th Guards Tank Army as the exploitation force. Dropped in, pretty early on, but, a little bit later, like a day or two after the initial penetration. Okay, so again, see, especially towards 45, Germans are getting weaker operationally, of course, in numbers. the Soviets were able to do more pursuit operations, use their tank armies to chase down and surround, create major pockets of the Germans. Okay, so often they would use again, the tanker, this additional tank and mechanized corps to support the tank army advances. Their command and control is getting much better at this point in terms of planning and also the execution of the operations. Here again, Glantz notes that, well, Soviets never had anything like what's it, the SDK, troop carriers, essentially. They hadn't developed those at this point. Of course, again, the later come along with, BTRs, MLTBs, and BMPs to remedy that. But, contrast to both, again, Western allies and the Germans, they didn't have that capacity, which is, again, why you see those photos of Soviet infantry cling onto Soviet tanks. It's kind of their version of armored infantry. Here, okay. So this is from Leopold, his description of, again, I think it's based on his examination of the Soviet archives and what the Germans had. Typical kind of concentration for Soviet bombardment prior to their breakthrough at this point in the war. So 15-minute concentration on defensive positions, 3 kilometers deep, and then a more determined 90-minute fire on pre-planned targets against artillery and heavy weapons. Then follow 20-minute on the main defended area, back again 25% of guns at intense rate, 5-minute steps, increase up to finally 100% saturation. Okay. So there was a rolling barrage before the actual assault. And again, Leopold talks here about that the Soviets used a double barrage, basically 2 lines of advancing fire for the first time here, in the case of First Belarusian fronts, penetration operation. Okay, and so what they did again in that case, 2 belts of fire, 1,000 meters apart, to a depth of 4 kilometers. So the German positions were hit twice, once by each belt of fire. All right, but Leopold, concludes from the German reports that, they didn't totally suppress the defensives, and particularly reverse slopes were not really hit. Okay, you can see here, one reason why, again, is that actually they did not meet the plan, essentially, for the amount of fire they dropped. Again, seeing in this case again, but also gives you an idea of, the huge amounts of planning units. Remember, again, the Soviets have this mathematical idea of warfare that, again, you deliver, X number of units of fuel or, artillery shells, and that will do what you need. Okay, so again, we already mentioned again, you have the integration of tank and assault gun units into the penetration operations. Okay. So again, here, Leopold talks about Soviets aiming at a depth of 50 to 90 kilometer advances per day. And again, 62% of Soviet tank forces were in these mobile groups for exploitation, which again, I think is significant. This is what allows them to do these deep operations and to encircle many forces from the Germans. So again, here, again, the penetration tank groups were generally put in on D-Day, June 22nd, and then or D+1, front mobile groups were supposed to be put in D+2 or D+3. So again, here, yeah. So in the case of Bagration, 1 tank and 2 mechanized corps were put in on D+1, and the Fifth Guards Tank Army was put in on D+2. So again, Leopold terms this a clean breakout, as the Soviets would have put it. Again, that the tactical defensive zone was penetrated, and then they had a clean breakout of the mobile forces. Okay, here again is the kinds of advances, Soviet fronts, which again are, quite impressive. Again, because, we're talking infantry and tanks able to, again, go, between, in this case, 13 and 21 kilometers in the first week. Then in the second week, still, again, even faster again, 16.6. Slowing down a bit, for the 2 weeks, July 5 to 16th. So again, down, but still, again, pretty impressive. Again, up to 16-kilometer advance per day. Again, that's how they roll, pretty far west by the time Bagration, officially comes to an end. Though, of course, again, we know, when Model replaces Bush, he does a much better job. And again, one of the interesting things, again, is, even though, the Soviets had still an impressive amount of mobile forces and, an overmatch to what the Germans have, say, again, in through to mid-July, they're not able to, break through the way they did early on. Again, probably has a lot to do with, again, a modal skill. Again, as the fireman of the German army, Wehrmacht, as they used to say. All right. So at the lower level, there were issues again in terms of basically the ability of the Soviet generals to, kind of think flexibly, to shift from one direction to the other, to kind of, but once you got to kind of the front level, they were pretty good at it at this point. And you see, again, basically, they beat all of their planning in terms of, when they would reach a location. There, Soviets did much better than they expected. So again, they'll hit basically, again, the line that they expect to get to July 15th by the 6th through the 7th. And again, here again, even as early as July 2nd, as in case of the town of Stolpy. Okay. Again, here it's interesting that, again, he's writing this in the 80s. So again, this is before we had the kind of research Glantz did on Soviet losses. Okay. So let's talk logistics now, which again is very much improved for the Soviets, but, still not, say, as good as, say, the Western Allies. They just didn't have, well, first off, the amount of stuff. And again, their organization is improving, but, still has issues. Okay. So this really gets into, again, the kind of, levels of supplies that needed. Okay. So for, again, 168 rifle divisions, 10 tank corps, 3 cavalry corps, 2 mech corps. The necessity that required 69,000 tons of supplies here. So talk about here, 2-day turnaround, 4 days. There, if they would run into problems here. So here, 4-day turnaround, they could deliver expected to deliver 31,000 tons. Okay, they had 60,000 trucks, average capacity of 2 tons. So that could provide, again, 121,000 for, a little under 2 days. Okay. Again, of course, again, the distance between the supply depots and the railheads could vary. They did have a pretty good, well, again, for the Soviet Union road network. that have been improved. Of course, again, the Army units used a lot of fuel. And again, as operations went on, they got obviously more and more distant. But they were able to, maintain the advance, although, not as quickly as maybe they would have liked. But again, they're operating at, very deep, very far from their railheads and supply depots. Okay, so their rate of advance is therefore reduced, but, pretty good. Okay, so here's typical Soviet truck of the period. Again, 1931 model in this case. Here again, the famous American Studebaker that came with Lend-Lease. Again, it was key. We'll see some of the numbers in a minute. Here. So this is Soviet truck and automobile production. So here you can see again, obviously that's the key number, more than 300,000 over the course of the war produced. But we'll see again that's, outweighed by U.S. Lend-Lease, which again, we'll see there are contradictory numbers. Here we have the number we have is about 400, a little over 400,000 sent through Lend-Lease through the war again. They break it down here. 77,000 Jeeps, 24,000 3/4-ton trucks, and 351,000 medium trucks. Again, mostly the Studebaker 2.5 ton. So again, most of these, as they say here, were delivered at 42 on. So again, it ramped up for, to provide, again, the mobile force for the Soviets and, mobile logistics. So again, here, while in 41 early on, again, they're using a lot of tractors to pull artillery. At this point in the war, they have enough trucks to basically pull all of their, regimental and divisional artillery. So here, this is one example of a crossing operation of the Dnieper in 44. Again, here with a pair of Studebakers, towing 76 millimeter guns. Okay. So the distances that they are able to move, again, remember, there was I think it's like a 405 kilometer move, of 5th Guards Tank Army in just a few weeks to reposition it to participate in Bagration. So again, their logistics and its flexibility, thanks to all these trucks that they have at this point, is greatly improved, and how they're able to do that kind of Maskirovka. Again, it's not just they're able to fool the Germans; they're able to move fast enough that the Germans that they can exploit Maskirovka. Okay. So again, here they talk about, again, the kind of distances they would hold back units before moving them up to the front lines for the D-Day attack. And again, so 50 kilometers back up to about 5 or 7 days. Then right before the attack, move 12 to 20 kilometers from the front. And then 1 or 2 nights before the attack, put them on the front lines. Okay, so typical distance of where they would hold the reserves, again, the mobile, is about 25 kilometers. At this point in the war, the Soviets are really good about radio silence, and that's one factor, of course, and now they're able to fool the Germans and to deny them intelligence. The kind of thing that happened in 41, where the Soviets were talking to each other over, open lines. The Germans were able to essentially learn everything from them as, in the past. So again, here, your discussion, again, these kind of mathematical formulas that are laid down, again, for artillery fire. So again, this necessitated, a huge concentration. Forgetting the company, there's one company who does these really interesting Eastern Front World War II games. And I think I remember they have one in Bagration. And basically part of the game, you know, you have to actually essentially allocate and move your supplies. You know, in terms of number of points, you know, they have truck units to do it. And it's a whole interesting thing in the game of you, again, basically moving forward, concentrating, you know, kind of units of supply, and then, you know, expending them to artillery or in fuel to move and so on. So that's actually kind of, you know, that's the one game I've seen that kind of does a good job of kind of exemplifying, you know, letting you see essentially how the Soviet logistics actually worked. Okay, so again, the huge amount of, so they moved 3 million tons, again, in preparation for Bagration. So again, using 12,000 trucks. Each front had its own transport brigade at this point in the war. Again, around 1,200. Each army had a transport regiment of 350 or so trucks. Okay, again, hospitals had been improved as well. So they had, for Bagration, 295,000 beds available, again, expecting about a 20% casualty rate. Okay, so here, they mentioned here Vasilevsky interceding with Stalin, letting him know that, again, this Third Guards Met Corps was slowed down because, again, the rail system couldn't keep up with these huge, the need to move huge amounts of soldiers and equipment and, of course, supplies. So this actually delayed the attack of First Belarusian Front. Okay, so one of the advantages, again, versus like German trucks, again, and Soviet trucks as well, again, the American Studebakers were pretty good, again, at kind of muddy conditions. Muddy, of course, again, the amount of paved roads in the Soviet Union was still, again, not great. This is actually not so great even in modern Russia. So, but again, the fact that you had, again, American trucks that could, negotiate even muddy, dirt roads was an advantage. Okay, so they used jeeps to lug around mortars. Okay, again, the trucks, again, also used to lug around anti-tank guns. With, again, we saw the photo of the Studebakers pulling 76 millimeter artillery. So here, we actually had that already. Sorry, I went back. Okay. Went through that. Okay. So again, one big constraint on operations, of course, again, these, the rail capacity, again, it's the same case still in Ukraine now, that again, logistics is rail-based. Again, because of the poor roads and also the lack of density of roads. So again, this gets into, too much detail here, but again, discuss again, single versus double track lines, how many trains you could get in per day. Again, 200 to double track, get in four of them, 200 trains could be moved. So every 24 hours, typically, again, you got in 90 to 100 trains, with 445 cars or so. And so that amounted to about 7,000 trains every 10 weeks. Okay, so here's an example of what's allotted for a rifle division here, late 43. Again, munitions, rations, fodder for horses, fuel, and a total 385 tons, 58 tons per day. Okay, a little less if you're in reserve. Okay, so here, 20 trains would bring in about 41,000 tons. To give you an idea of this, scale, how that would break down again to individual divisions. So here, for The 6 weeks up to Bagration, Soviets delivered more than 5.7 million tons of supplies. Again, from 2,800 trains, again, under 26,000 cars. Okay, so this was, of course, building up, but also, again, providing, the daily supply for these units. Okay, so that's 400,000 tons stockpiled of munitions, 300,000 fuel, and 500,000 of rations. So again, 4.5 million were for the daily allowance and supplies. Okay. So breaking that down again, about 67 trains per day devoted for daily requirements, with again 20 to 30 for the buildup. So totaling up to 2,100. So again, Rifle Division required 16 trains for this 6-week period. Tank Corps 20, Mech Corps 33, Cavalry Corps 57 trains. Because moving the horses, but also again fodder obviously takes up a lot of space. Okay, Tank Regiment 3 trains, Tank Brigade 3, Tank Regiment 2, Assault Gun Regiment 1 train. So the Soviets moved 56 rifle divisions, 4 cavalry corps, 10 tank corps. Again, I break it down. 2 mechanized corps, tank brigade, 14 tank regiments, 31 assault gun regiments for this operation. So these moves required 1,400 trains over a 10-week period, 21 per day, and 10 trains per day for the artillery and other units. Okay. So again, the Soviets tend to see these things, talk about combat loads in terms of both artillery and POL, petroleum oil lubricants. So again, there were 3.5 combat loads on hand for the beginning of Bagration for these 2 armies. So that's typical. Okay, again, 2 combat loads for the 45 millimeter guns, 14 to 22 day supply of food, 7 days ration of oats for the horses. I would think that, for 6 cars, only 3 for, etc. 2 to 4 loads of POL for each army at this point. Again, they have this number here for hospital beds. Here, 16 veterinary hospitals of it for the horses, obviously. Okay, so here's for 1st Baltic Front, 76 regiments, artillery, mortar, anti-tank. 3 guards mortar, again, those are, of course, the Katyushas, and 5 guards mortar regiments. Okay, so that's 4,400 total guns, and 70 to 80% were concentrated on the main attack axis. Okay. Wait, no. Down here. There we go. Okay. So again, this is a different assessment. Again, kind of like we saw with Leopold. It's similar, but again, talks a little bit more about the organization of the artillery fire. Here, so 45-minute suppression period, maximum intensity, and going 2 kilometers deep. So in a 30 to 60 minute artillery barrage to accompany the actual attack in order to repress the trench lines, and in coordination at that point with, again, Soviet artillery spotters to help with taking out particular German strong points. So again, using 3 to 4 ammunition loads, typically for these massive concentrations of fire. I'm going to break it down here. 2.5 for mines and artillery, 1.5 for 45, and 76 millimeter, 2.25, 122, 152, 2 for the big 203 millimeter guns. Okay. So here's the German estimates for Soviet truck production. I think a little bit lower than the actual ones. Okay, so here this gives even larger number for Lend-Lease trucks. Again, 427,000 total. And again, the U.S. had promised under 59,000 from mid 43 to mid 44. So obviously this would have been available for Bagration. Okay, so it's here again, 100,000 delivered in 43, 125,000 in 44, 150,000 in the last months of the war. Okay, and here they argue about, whether, well, obviously, again, some of the trucks would have been, assembled by, Soviet factories. Here it's interesting, again, that, the truck factory at Gorky actually had, I guess, at this point, they had copied the American Studebaker, and they were, and the Dodge, they were manufacturing them at this point. Okay, again, Soviet soldiers really liked the Studebaker. Again, as I said before, because of its cross-country travel, its ability to negotiate muddy roads, and talking about, how many you needed, again, here to tow, for example, a howitzer regiment, seven gas trucks, a Jeep, 21 harvester trucks, and 14 Studebakers. Okay. All right, obviously, again, as Soviets went deeper in their advance, supply problems started to crop up, slowed things down. And again, at this point, they're 300 kilometers from their supply centers. And so the round trip for the trucks to bring stuff forward required 4 days at that point. Okay, I think we've seen this before. So skip this. Okay. So we're going to be dealing with First Baltic and First, Second, and Third Belarusian fronts, opposing Army Group Center. So there were huge increases, we'll see here, in their strength in this period. And 60% in troops. Obviously, this is the huge number. 300% increase in tanks and SP guns. 85% increase in artillery. 62% increase in air. Okay, so again, huge, obviously, there's a huge number of trains and trucks to bring all that forward. Okay, so real strength for Army Group Center was 700,000, and the total strength on the Soviet side was 2.5 million. Add all of their forces, 4,000 tanks, 24,000 cannon, 5,300 artillery again, and in tanks, artillery, and air, these are 10-to-1 ratios in favor of the Soviets. Again, well, we'll get more into at another point the actual Maskirovka operations, but at this point, again, the Soviets are very good at hiding them. Again, they totally hid, for example, the fact that they had added an entire Guards tank army behind Third Belarusian front. Okay, so again, the Germans were fooled again. This, of course, is a famous Gehlen, who, again, for whatever reason, the U.S. decided was this intelligence genius, despite the fact that he, screwed the pooch on things like Bagration, got totally fooled by their deception operations. But, yeah. So Bush was basically more worried about, his right flank again. Remember, the fear was of attack coming out of Western Ukraine, a deep thrust, either north or south, to either cut off the Balkans entirely or cut everybody, up to the Baltic off. Okay, again, here again, we have Ziesler saying that Army Group Center is, not a problem. Sounds like Blinken right before October 7th. The things are great in the Middle East. And then we know what happened. Okay. But again, there are signs here. Look, again, I know this, that they, Soviet captured pilot told the Germans, hey, Zhukov's in the area, essentially. Of course, again, partisan operations increased in the run-up to the offensive. Again, it makes it appear that an early start of the offensive cannot be ruled out. So they're expecting some kind of offensive, but they thought the operations against Army Group Center would be a distraction operation for the big attack again against Army Group North Ukraine. All right, we mentioned this before. Last time we did this, but again, Bush in particular was a problem. He had this big run-in with Hitler a few months before Bagration, and at that point, he's really cowed and just wants to suck up to Der Fuhrer. So he will execute all the the hold fast, the firm positions, the fortress. He won't challenge Hitler on that, even though some of his subordinate generals like Reinhardt will be begging him from the beginning of Bagration to let them retreat in order to save their forces. But again, he won't go against that. Model, as we know, will do a much better job. So again, then, as Jim said, again, really there's needs to be a lot more, we did see over, we went over to the New York Public Library, the Schwartzman, big, and took a look. There are a lot of new Russian books on Bagration that have, and I would assume about the whole war, that have come out in the 2000s that we found. So again, obviously, neither me or Jim reads Russian well, so we couldn't, we would just kind of look at the pictures and maps and kind of try and figure things out. But my guess is, again, they've done a lot of some of the work that Jim's talked about needs to be done, for example, at least from the Soviet side, on these fortresses and again on operations. We found some, very specific, like there was a whole book, maybe I'll bring it up later, just on the operations around Bobryansk that this guy had done. So again, obviously, there's still a strong interest amongst Russians. I guess kind of similar to like how we obsess about Overlord. Obviously, this is their big operation in the war. Maybe a little bit less than Kursk, of course, but certainly again, it's more successful and more significant than Kursk in that sense. All right, so here's the whole org. Again, you'll see again an air army attached to each front, or two in the case of, again, what's basically a double front, first Belarusian. You can see again the attached armies. You can see in case of first and second Baltic, they have three shock armies amongst them. You can concentrate a lot more artillery in those. See here again the one tank army, but again, see again each, with the exception again of first Belarusian, each front typically had 3 to 4 armies again, or in case this 9 in the case of the 10 in the case of the large. Basically 2 fronts in one. First Belarusian. Oh wait, okay, there we go. Okay, so this is from Leopold. This is the concentration by front of the forces, again, attached, divisions, mech and tank corps, cavalry groups, assault gun brigades, independent, again, down the line. See again. And then, yeah, so again, with the addition of the left part of First Belarusian Front, which comes in later on again by mid-July. So again, here Leopold gives a smaller number again. From the total numbers, we know it's again actually about 10 to 1 air superiority for the Soviets. And again, yeah, again, we went through the air numbers. Again, yeah, these kind of numbers for fighters in particular are pretty shocking. Okay, so that's General, well, again, Alexander Vasilevsky, who's Stavkov representative, let's see, for, let's go down, we'll go back. Here, yeah, so he's Stavkov representative for 2nd and 1st Belarusian fronts. Again, let's go through his career. We'll go through him and Zhukov. Okay. So again, Vasilevsky is someone who would not have been able to advance to the rank that he did under the Tsarist army, of course, again. He's from a relatively poor background. Again, he had only gotten up to, make the rank of captain in World War I. But again, you know, remember the Tsarist army always privileged the nobility. So again, he would not have been able to come, you know, one of the 2 big guys in the Red Army, along with Zhukov, and the most competent staff and kind of coordinating officer in the entire Soviet army. Again, you know, well, he's, you know, compared to him, Zhukov always had kind of the reputation of kind of like a butcher, a guy who would, you know, got a lot of his troops killed, where Vasilevsky, you know, in the general sense, and it's not just contemporaries, this is, you know, something pretty much everybody who's looked at Soviet operations during the war and operational art, that he was the more intellectual than Zhukov, but also kind of more sophisticated in his understanding of operational art, his ability to kind of, you know, going around the Germans rather than attack them frontally. Okay, so kind of like Zhukov, he kind of falls off under Khrushchev when, again, I guess those World War II era generals were kind of eased out. Again, obviously, Khrushchev would have known Vasilevsky and worked with them personally as a commissar in the Ukraine during the war. Okay, so here's his part in his family. Again, his family was relatively poor. Their lives did improve again when kind of his dad, who was a priest, kind of similar. We'll see again, this results in some interesting relations with Stalin. But I think, well, again, I've never seen it described that way, but I'm guessing it might have something to do with, again, remember Stalin was going to be a priest at some point. So maybe the fact that, you know, Vasilevsky's dad was a priest, there was some kind of connection between the two. Because, yeah, Stalin did, we'll see, trust Vasilevsky to an extent, and, you know, knew he was basically a good commander. Okay, so here's interesting little issue, I guess, about former seminarians at the military school he was sent to. And again, the family was kind of had to take struggle financially in order to afford to send him to military school. So there he is, I think, as a Tsarist officer. So here's his experience through. Here that again, he had this idea, he's going to go be like a agronomist or a lawyer, actually. That he kind of, you know, the idea that he would stay in the army, again, is something that developed over time. So again, he wanted out by, you know, the time of the Russian Revolution. I guess I would imagine in part because he knew, you know, his chances for advancement in the Russian army were not that great because of, you know, the emphasis on using noble officers. And again, here it seems that, you know, he to some extent, preferred, again, the civilian life. It was kind of interesting, how he wanted to be this, major marshal of the Soviet army. So again, he re-enters because his regiment had elected him as their commander again, as the kind of Soviets had that kind of, democratic election process, guys, kind of similar to, what we did in our Civil War, with the volunteer regiments electing their officers. So he got back in that way, retired again in 1918, went on to be a school teacher near Tula. Reconscripted again during the Civil War, obviously, put in command of a reserve battalion. Then he was promoted to lead a regiment. Did not fight at this point in the war. Then was sent as a deputy regimental commander, fought in the Polish-Soviet War. So he winds up in the occupation forces near Vilna at the end of that. There's a map showing again the Soviet offensive all the way to Warsaw, the dramatic reversal, and the eventual Treaty of Riga. And the positions that, so been here, Vilnius for the post-war. Okay, continued to fight against the whites for the rest of the Civil War. Promoted to regimental commander by 30. He was a good organizer and trainer. He took this, the regimental commander course, 28. And this is important, of course, again, he's hooks up with Voroshilov, Triandafilov, of course, is famous for his ideas in the development of deep operation. Shaposhnikov is the most important guy. And we'll see, of course, again, Shaposhnikov will be chief of staff, the Red Army at one point again before Vasilevsky is, he's, I think he's either sick or wounded at one point. I think it's in late 41, early 42, and Vasilevsky will be brought in to replace him at that point. So again, obviously, again, it's, who you know. He also studied under Tukhachevsky, was famous for the development of Soviet armor. Even again, Zhukov, we'll see here, was impressed with Vasilevsky, gave him his proper respect, knew his job, and had a great respect from everybody. Again, from obviously from before he rose to high rank. Okay, so the Great Purges turned out to be an opportunity for Vasilevsky to replace the purged officers. So that's one reason why he was able to advance so fast here in 37 into the staff, General to Stavka. It's interesting, again, that he hadn't joined the party before 38. So he was in the Operations Directorate. Again, he's under Shaposhnikov. Helps to plan the winter war against Finland. So here it's interesting again that, again, as a lot of people did back then, he had shunned his parents, his dad in particular, because of his unsuitable, reactionary past as a priest. And again, here, this is again what the interesting, again, maybe it's the fact that Stalin was going to be a priest, had some connection here, that he actually told them, hey, you should go talk to your dad. So, again, Stalin sometimes, could be, I'm sure he had his moves, but again, this time, again, it's interesting that he kind of pushed Vasilevsky to finally see. I guess he hadn't seen his dad for years, and obviously since 26, out of fear of that he would be denounced for being a son of the an enemy of the people and so on. Okay, so Vasilevsky really gets involved with the operations around Typhoon. Again, he's the coordinator for the Western Front and against the German advance towards Moscow. Okay, so he's going between the fronts and Moscow at this point. He's also trying to organize the actual defense of Moscow. And when Shaposhnikov joined Stalin in evacuating Moscow, Vasilevsky remained as the guy on the ground. So again, seen as a specialist, described by Khrushchev back then. So he's the guy from Stavka who remains in Moscow during the defense. So he had a big role in the counteroffensive in Moscow. Brings his family back to Moscow. I didn't know that. All right, yeah. So again, here, in April 42, Shaposhnikov gets sick, and Vasilevsky is appointed acting chief. So again, obviously, about this point, again, in terms of defense of Moscow, it's working extreme hours. Again, staying up at the 4 a.m. And at that point, again, Shaposhnikov had gotten increasingly sick then, so Vasilevsky was taking on more of the work at Stavka. Okay, so he's involved in Battle of Kharkov, that huge failure. Of course, again, I don't think it's as big a failure as Mars from Zhukov's side. He did ask for permission to, along with Zhukov, to withdraw, but Stalin, of course, denied. And a huge Soviet force was surrounded and destroyed by the Germans, which helped set up Operation Blau. So again, Stalin, I think, may have realized, hey, these guys were right. And again, of course, as the war went on, Stalin increasingly delegated authority to Vasilevsky and Zhukov into subordinate commanders. So he did learn. So again, he was, of course, involved in Uranus as Stavka representative for the Stalingrad front. He was coordinating the defense. He and Zhukov did the plan for Uranus. Zhukov, of course, was commanding in Operation Mars, while Vasilevsky did the more successful Uranus operation. Okay, you have this run-in with Rokossovsky, which again, apparently Rokossovsky, remember, winds up in the Polish army after World War II. Griped about it, I guess, in his memoirs afterwards. About, again, wanting an additional army against the Kotelnikov counteroffensive. Here. So again, obviously, he's involved in Kursk, against Citadel. So he coordinated Voronezh and the steppe front. Again, the steppe front was the reserve front behind the front line fronts. Again, Voronezh and steppe. So he was on this axis. So he's the one who faced 2nd SS Panzer and 3rd Panzer Corps. The big attack through to, Prokhorovka and all that. It's interesting. They got involved in the Donbass offensive and helped in the clearing of Crimea. Okay, so he was also part of the Ukraine offensive in early 44, helped to retake Odessa. The second guy, in addition to Zhukov, to get the Order of Victory. He's wounded in Sevastopol. So again, we'll see how he coordinates first and 3rd Belarusian fronts. Okay. And so obviously part of the East Prussian operation. So kind of like, again, how Zhukov was put in charge of was the 1st Belarusian during the Berlin operation. He's again given front command for the East Prussian operation. Yeah, surround Königsberg and Pillau. All right. So, and he directs. Was it August Storm? I think. Yeah. Well, Ted, of course, can talk a bit about this too. Again, this massive and successful tank operation that smashed Kwantung Army into pieces and got all the way into North Korea by the end of the war. Okay, so again, Khrushchev got rid of him after Stalin's death. The deputy minister for a while. Oh yeah, so here again are the different. So again, this is of course what they decided on. Again, a shallow pincer movement. Again, there was Baltic plan. Here's again, well, that's eventually going to be the Yassi-Kishinev operation, which will be quite successful. Again, this is what the Germans really feared against Army Group, punching through Army Group North Ukraine, rolling all the way through Warsaw to the Baltic and cutting, that would cut off like, I think, 1 million troops. So that would have been the end of the war right there. Okay, so yeah, so Zhukov's going to be in command of second, support, coordinating second and first Belarusian fronts in this operation. So again, we of course know Zhukov's career much better. So we'll just kind of go, yeah. So here's some discussion of the partisans part of this, which again is, it was important, although again, the effect has been exaggerated by the Soviets and the Russians over the course of history. They did have an effect, they did hit a lot of rail. They, cut supply lines. It didn't obviously help the Germans. So here's a photo of a partisan group. So there were supposed to be a total of 374,000 partisans throughout Belarus. Obviously, not all are going to be in Bagration then. 199 brigades, with again another 400,000 reserves they could call on. Okay. The Soviets would use C-47s to land supplies to control such large areas. They could do that. So again, did not result in the diversion of any German units for the most part. Another photo of a group. So again, they were organized in bands of about 100 men each, then grouped into brigades of a few thousand. Of course, again, this is communism, so centralized controls imposed, ideological control, of course. So again, here, their Soviets claimed, again, they had 240,000 men operating behind Bagration. Okay. So there was a radio order to step up attacks to the partisans 2 weeks before things started. So again, the report is, they had 10,000 demolition operations on the night of 19-20 June at a lot of depth. Many were dismantled, but they did cut supply lines for a day. Another photo. All right, we had this already. So here's, I guess this is a German map showing again artillery suppression, but also partisan attacks along the rail lines. So remember, so again, this would have been the front line, Vitebsk, Orsha, Mogilev, Zlobin, Bobriosk is right by it. So so here. So, oh yes, and this is again right in August, so a few months before all this. Again, it's an idea of kind of the concentration of attacks typical for this period. So here's a map of the entire rail network in the Soviet Union into Poland and East Prussia. Here's again example of partisans mining a rail. Here's an org chart, well, the notional org chart for the partisans. Your typical org for a partisan brigade. Photo. Here's again for May, June, around Bryansk, concentration of partisan forces. Camp. Okay. So here's showing for July 43 all across the Western Front. October, showing more detailed distribution. Okay, for January 44. For spring 44, in the rear of Army Group Center. So here's an example of a German anti-partisan operation, surround and destroy partisan groups. Again, here's another chart on losses. Okay, so here we have First Baltic Front. It's under General Bagration. Again, he's an Armenian. He's Mentor Zhukov. Again, he had been commander of 16th Army, which then became 11th Guards Army. We'll see has a prominent role in Bagration. Is at Kursk, and again was promoted to command First Baltic Front in November 43. So here are subordinate armies. Again, it was pitted against 3rd Panzer Army. Again, 43rd was the one that successfully encircled Vitebsk. Okay, so here are the numbers. Approximate 359,000 men, 561 tanks. Oh, so we have something in the chat. Oh yeah, so yeah, just Jim was saying again, just raise your hand to ask a question here. So again, seeing at each one of these armies had a considerable number of tanks, assault guns, and of course artillery, huge number of artillery. So here again, 902 aircraft just for this one, and again, almost 20,000 trucks for first. Yeah. So there's General Bagration on the left, got the mustache. Here's again, his Bryansk operation. Here's at Kursk again. I guess that's his wife. So here's the organization. Again, you can see, like, for example, here the attached Katyusha regiments to 6th Guards Army. Again, you can see how reinforced it is, both with the individual tank regiments and brigades, SP gun units attached. See 4th Shock Army. Again, well, as you see, as an interesting organization, it has only one infantry corps, but again, it has these separate infantry divisions and brigades attached. Again, here an anti-tank regiment, gun regiment, another anti-tank regiment, mortar regiment, tank battalion attached, three infantry rifle divisions under the 83rd Rifle Corps. Again, we see again the attached 1st Tank Corps to the front. Again, you can see again, attached anti-tank regiments, Guards Mortar, again, Katyusha regiments, SP Gun Brigade, Mech Battalion, etc. Here we can see again attached to 43rd Army, 3 tank brigades and 1 tank regiment, 2 SP Gun. Again, you can see again how, especially like something like 43rd Army had a huge amount of attachments. And look at 6 Guards, how many attachments they got and how many corps they have. Again, that's a truly massive number of attachments. Again, 2 whole artillery divisions. So obviously that's clearly, again, the breakthrough force for First Baltic Front. Okay, and just see it by, again, those 2 artillery divisions that are attached. Okay, so here, So here I also mentioned, we'll get to him, General Ivan Cherkakovsky, who was in command of 3rd Belarusian Front. Okay, with 39th, 5th Armies, 11th Guards, 31st Army, again, its own cavalry Met group under General Oslakovsky. And again, of course, they're the ones who have 5th Guards Tank Army behind them. Sorry, here we go. Okay. So this is correlation of forces for First Baltic Front and their ratios to the Germans. Okay, concentration per kilometer of front, density of mortars, anti-tank guns, tanks, etc. Number of aircraft, again, over 1,000. Here's more number. All right, so here's again the breakdown of aircraft. Number of sorties. Okay, there's Chief of Staff, the Commissar. So we'll just go through this quickly. So this is the, again, listing again, all you saw in that org chart. Just, I'm going and going and going. So this is Second Baltic Front, which is not directly involved, but gives you an idea. Similar, again, attached tank corps. So here again, here First Shock Army has a lot of supporting forces. Third Shock Army is not too bad either. And again, the Guards, of course, it's the Guards and Shock Armies that tended to have a lot of attached forces. Okay, now we move on to Third Belarusian Front. Okay, again, mentioned General Oslakovsky's Cavalry Met Group. Again, 5th Guards Tank Army. We'll get it to General Smithstroff in a minute. That's interesting. Yeah, Chernikovsky, Jewish. He had been commander of 60th Army in Kursk, then Ukrainian operations. So again, while we already talked a little bit about, the 2 groups, its strength, again, is considerable. Again, obviously, I think 5th Guards Tank Army is at least 500 to 600 tanks alone. So that's, you see, about half of the tanks that they had for the front. Interesting, again, considerably lower number of trucks than, which was like not over 19,000 for First Baltic Front. So that's kind of interesting. So there he is, General Ivan Chernyakhovsky. There he is again. The young guy, you can see. I'll see again, he's on all those, I guess, that's here with the Soviet Union medals. So there's that org of that. So here's again the cavalry mech group. Again, you see again. So here they attached again the artillery again. They didn't move them down to the army level, but held them at the front level. You can see again, as with First Baltic Front, there are two artillery divisions for the attack, and again, of course, an additional number of artillery brigades, and an entire guards, mortar, again, a Katyusha division as well. So this is a huge artillery force. Actually, again, here, let's go back in. So here are the numbers again. That's even more than First Baltic. Those are huge numbers of guns. So here again, you have 39th Army, 5th Guards Tank Reserve again with 2 tank corps. You can see again here, 5th Army is clearly again the breakthrough force. Again, look at all those attachments. Entire Katyusha Brigade, entire division. So again, well, look here. So we have 1, 2, 3 artillery divisions, 1 Katyusha division. So just in that one front. So that's a huge concentration of artillery. You know, see here again, 3 rifle corps within 5th Army, 2 within 39th Army. So again, even though, again, if we look at it again, there are fewer armies, if we compare them to First Baltic, we see again, 5th Army is truly massive. And again, also in terms of number of divisions, 7 and 9. So again, these are bigger armies than you had with typically with First Baltic. Okay, so again, as you can kind of see with the org chart, these guys had a lot of armor support. Okay, 1,500 total. So again, here's the concentration per kilometer, all these different weapons. So here's the ratios. Again, this other sector, this 5th Army sector. th Guards sector. Even higher concentration ratio. Okay, so he aimed at between Minsk and Orsha. He's going to be able to advance quite quickly, blow a huge hole in I think that's 4th Army. Yeah. All right. Again, Germans knew that they were facing 2nd and 3rd Belarusian fronts, but that didn't clue them in to the huge reinforcements and build up on the other side of the line. And they got fooled by Mascarovka. All right, so here's General Rotmitsarov, commander of 5th Guards Tank Army, the mustache. So here's his career. So he was not one who had served in the Russian army during World War I. He joins the Red Army after, served in the Russian Civil War, involved in suppressing the Kronstadt Rebellion, in the Polish-Soviet War. So rifle regiment commander, he went to Franz. instructor at the Moscow Higher Military Academy, Chief of Staff of 3rd Mechanized Corps when the war starts. Okay, he survives that. He's then put in command of a tank brigade near Kalinin during the Moscow battles. He's put in command first of 5th Guards Tank Army by the time of Kursk. He's, of course, the guy in command at Prokhorovka. Again, of course, still a lot of debate about what went on. Whether, I mean, again, Soviets suffered huge losses at Prokhorovka. Still a question, you know, they really stopped the Germans. So it's the biggest tank, but not the biggest tank battle in history. Okay. So we'll see again, thanks to that, and also to the heavy losses, 5th Guards Tank Army, can hardly his fault, or at least that's what the Soviets thought. He's removed from command after Bagration. So that's his last big command of the war. Although he's involved in the post-war Soviet army as like an inspector of their tank forces. Okay. So here's again, yeah, another listing of all the sub units. See, massive here. Let's see. Here, so yeah. So here's the subunits of 5th Guards Tank Army. So, 3rd Guards Tank Corps, and I think it's 3rd Tank Corps is the other one. Yeah. Sorry, oh yeah. That's right, 29th Tank Corps. Okay, there's the air support. Okay, again, here this is the cavalry Met group under Ostlakovsky. I have to find a picture of him. All right, now we go down to 2nd Belarusian. Again, one of the 2 fronts under Zhukov. That's General Zakharov, Georgy. Okay, has been in the Civil War, Petrograd. I guess they have issue again on him being sick. Oh, sorry, General Meklis being sick. So again, another one of these guys who was important staff positions, then made into a front commander. So here's, again, another really big front. Again, not as many tanks. Again, they basically had an attached tank. Because it's a tank or mech corps. Is a tank corps, yeah. So here, again, a considerably smaller number of trucks. So there he is, yes. The bald guy on the left. Here's the rest of his career up to Bagration. And here again, force ratios and the density of forces here. So there's another listing of forces. All right, now we go to Rokossovsky's 1st Belarusian. Okay, Rokossovsky had been a Met Corps commander early on in the war. Then he was Army commander. He had been at Stalingrad and Kursk. I guess he was on the right flank of Bagration. So he's the one who's executes the encirclement of Bobryansk. He had led, with 1st Belarusian, we'll talk about this probably at another point, an unsuccessful offensive into Belarusia in winter 44 that was a big failure. It resulted in a lot of losses. Okay, so their mobile group was Pliev's cavalry Met group. Okay, So again, as we saw, it had a large number of attached armies, including again the Polish Communist Army. So a northern and southern group. Okay, we'll see 9th Tank Corps is also attached. 1st Guards Corps attached to 65th Army. And again, the Pliev Horse Cavalry Mechanized Group. Okay, here are the force size. For some reason, they don't give the personnel strength. Oh wait, here, sorry, no, a little over 1 million, yeah. And here again, with such a big, yeah, it's interesting, yeah. Fewer trucks than first Belarusian, first Baltic front. But again, these could vary. And of course, again, there were Stavka reserves of trucks that could be added, I'm sure. But again, here, well, such a big corps, again, going to have a huge number of guns supporting them. Let's see here. And 2,000 aircraft. So there he is on the right. Another photo of him, more staged, yeah. So here, first Belarusian had to do a considerable number of river crossings. So here's their attached kind of engineer, assault boats, inflatable boats, etc. So again, considerable, more than 100 assault boats attached to each one of these armies. Again, force ratios and concentrations. Okay, so they had supplies a bit more than the rest, 10 to 15 days, 4.5 combat loads of ammo, 3 POL loads, 1,700 motor vehicles, with the capacity to deliver 4,100 tons per day. Again, so you can see again, this has a much greater concentration than some of the other fronts we've seen on this sector, north of Rogachev. All right, so here again, yeah, I can see again the kind of force ratios the Soviets were able to attain on specific breakthrough sectors. How they did it, of course. Okay, again, another org breakdown. Okay, here's again, remember we had that thing with the Dnieper river flotilla. So there's all the boats for river crossings and support minesweepers. Your entire artillery penetration corps. All right. Let's see, where are we on? Okay, well, I'll just wrap it up in a minute. Just let me finish this section. So here, yeah. So again, they focus on specific breakthrough sectors. So they narrowed again from a 240-kilometer front here with first Belarusian down to a 28, to separate, totaling 28 kilometers breakthrough sectors. So again, here's the concentration of forces on these main attacks. You can see it's considerable, 90% of the tanks, 93% of reserve artillery, 63% of mortars, 62% of the infantry divisions, etc. Okay, and so Vasilevsky and Stalin had this meeting with Stalin. So again, that's where they started the planning for Bagration. Okay, again, they were starting out Vitebsk, Orsha, Mogilev, and Bobriosk, which we'll be spending a lot of time talking about.
Alex, we could perhaps do that another time,
Okay.
Stuff. And are you, Kenny, you're having problems with his audio? Can you hear him, Kenny? All right. Well, first of all, I guess one thing I learned, we'll just do this in more biteable chunks next time, because to go through the German army in detail and the massive buildup of the Soviets. I mean, remember, the Soviets, the intelligence picture the Germans had was practically non-existent. We haven't even shown that to you yet. They just completely underestimated this concentration. It's remarkable buildup. But what I can see is probably next time we'll just simply make it more biteable in terms of because this is a vast subject, and we're just learning how to handle it, since we're very familiar with the Normandy operation, or let's say Operation Market Garden. We're going to do something on Operation Market Garden down the road, but this is all terra incognita for us to deal with in depth. And so this is as much a learning experience for me as it is for Alex. But Kenny, are you getting them now? Are you can you give me a thumbs up? Are you hearing the sound right now, Ken? Yes, you are. Okay. All right. So comments or
hearing the sound.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
You're getting the sound. So comments or any kind of comments people want to make at this point. Ted, Jim, you've been very loyal. Jim, sitting here listening to us go on here, or Hal, or others, or Bob.
Ted, you got it.
Yeah, go on, Ted. If you guys want to unmute.
I can't comment. I'm learning so much that I don't know, and I'm just realizing, when I think of the Soviet Union and the Red Army as it is grinding through Eastern Europe in 1944 and then 45, it's just the idea of what it must have felt like if American intelligence had any conception of what was on the other side of the Berlin handshake. I wonder if we have all these amazing post-war thoughts of somehow we should have just continued the war, live with the Germans and gone west.
Churchill's, what was his operation?
Yeah, and all that whole argument.
Operation Unthinkable.
Yeah, which should have been unthinkable.
Absolutely unthinkable. But the whole conception. How that must when I think of the Soviet Union and that Red Army, then I think of the Russian army in the 1980s when they were faced with an American superiority of forces in terms of technology in Central Europe, and they were down to the point where they only had the ability to, if they had wanted to go to war in NATO against NATO, they had to go either nuclear, which would be suicidal, or they had to go chemical, which is also possibly suicidal, because the response that certainly we in the United States side and the American intelligence services bombarded them with what we were going to do if you dared to use chemical weapons in Europe. Essentially, Kiev, Minsk, and Warsaw were gone. That was our first response. That was the message we were sending in. So I think how much of that is left in the Red Army's legacy mind? How many young officers in the Russian Army today have had any chance to do what Alex just did? I wonder if they even know this stuff,
right?
Because I'm sure they taught it. They told them
higher level officers. Yeah,
oh, no,
I mean, they still have deep operations, deep battle in their mind. Even
exactly, but the scale is so different from the reality they face.
It's in their heads. It's part of their DNA.
Yeah.
Just like
we have air superiority in all our
assault breaker. Airland battle is like embedded in.
No, I know that was what was going in when I was in government. That's what the Airland Battle 2000 had just been announced. Everyone was all excited about it. I remember all the analysts on the SOVA forces SOVA branches were jumping up and down trying to figure out what in the hell the Air Force, the U.S. Military was doing, because isn't this going to provoke a war? It was a real strong feeling within the Central Intelligence Agency, let me tell you, and even more so in State Department. They were really concerned that we were about to provoke them into a war because we would be so much superior to them. They are that we felt.
Well, and I should add that one of the reasons why I wanted to go into such detail, and I guess in retrospect, we probably should have just dealt with the German army first, then dealt with the Soviet army as the second thing. That would have been a sounder way to approach that. So we'll just do that in smaller bites. But I just wanted to, give a sense, because, when Alex went through that whole rendition of the order of battle, of the Soviet Army for this. It just is remember, they did not have an inkling of the size of what was coming at them. And it's extraordinary because, when you look at the deception operations launched in World War II by the United States and the British, starting from the North African campaign, because, the start to deception of Operation Fortitude and all the deception operations of the order of battle of the British and the Americans, that starts in the North African. That's the North African campaign, and it's extended into the situation of 43, 44. Too bad Gary isn't here because he could pontificate about the Second Front issue. But it's clear that the Soviets are doing the same thing. The Soviets are doing the same thing at a level that we still don't have a sophisticated appreciation of, aside from the stuff we get from reading David's books or some of the books on Soviet intelligence. It must be an incredible story that we still don't have an idea about how they're operating their intelligence operations. Hal, you wanted to say something?
Well, I particularly appreciated Alex's classification of the Soviets as, the mathematical view of combat operations. And that's something that I probably intellectually understood from all that I've read, but I'd never heard it termed or framed that way. I mean, and that makes perfect sense for just ultra technocratic Soviet culture that everything is numbers, everything is
has that thinking. If the modern Russian army has that mechanical mathematical thing as part of their DNA.
Yeah.
Like if you read, there's a guy Andrei Martyanov, again, he's one of these YouTube but again, he's written some good books, and he's done some things on and I guess we do it too, these kind of formulas that are kind of embedded, like how to calculate combat power, and all these delta this, delta, again, really complicated math. But they're in, to be like, but again, it has a logic to it, and has a logic of your concentration of force and how we're going to deliver X number of rounds per sector. Clearly they're still, it's a way to do it, and it's working for them in Ukraine. So, but go on, Hal.
Well, and it makes sense in a country that has an industrial base to be able to do that. I mean, I don't think you ever see the Japanese military doing this, because it's not only not the way they think, it's just they don't have that kind of industrial quantity to even imagine being able to do that.
Not even really the arsenal of democracy. But James, did you want to make any comparisons with Eighth Army or British, how the British thought about their operations? If you want to unmute. But you got to unmute.
All that tricky Zoom stuff.
Yeah. Oh, he's frozen, I think.
Oh, he's frozen right now. Yeah, Jim's frozen. Well, look, you just unmute if you want, Jim. No sweat. It's a really interesting what Hal said about the mathematical. Yeah, go on, Jim.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're breaking up. You're freezing in a way.
I mean, it seems to me that the aspect that was very new compared to the Soviet Army the year before. They clearly were much better trained. It'd be interesting to read their training manuals, if any are actually available in English.
There's if you know LibGen, there's an American officer, Richard N. Armstrong. Well, first off, he wrote this book on Red Army tank commanders, but he did let me see if I can put it in. I'll put it in the chat. He did a book. You can get it off LibGen. Well, it's like a staff paper that collects, again, the mechanized and tank regulations, the Soviet for 1944. Let me.
Well, that's a good question, Jim. Because
sorry. Let me bring up the title. I'll show it to you guys.
Yeah, maybe you can bring it up, Alex. But it raises a really interesting question about how they're actually improving and learning from the armor operation. So this is the book, Red Armor Combat Orders. Interesting.
All right. Okay.
So again, you can get it on LibGen. I think it might even be available as like a DoD publication. It's obviously but here, yeah. So again, it really goes into a lot of detail about rail moves. Again, the command and control here.
You have it as a PDF, Alex?
No, it's a book. You might be able to get it off LibGen. I think they have different formats here. So again, actually, Glance and Richard Armstrong did it. You'll see again there, yeah. But he's the main translator and author. Yes, he did it with. Remember, I think this would have been during when Glance was in charge. Was like the Soviet here. So here's the. So again, they have all these orders, and they go into a lot. They're the official regs, how they would have deployed, what they're supposed to think about.
All right, that's good stuff.
So again, on recon, I mean, it's really breaks it down, like how much time they're supposed to give to planning, at what levels, concentration. It goes into a lot of detail. Obviously, these are regs. What went on in reality, But yeah, here's on supply.
What's the book called again?
It's
Red Armor
Combat Orders here.
Oh, interesting.
Again, just LibGen has it here. Yeah, Red Armor Combat Orders, Combat Regulations for Tank and Mechanized Forces 44.
Cool.
Ledge series of Soviet Study of War #3. Again, it's definitely worth going into.
Bob, do you have any comments? Mr. Rowan.
We put Bob to sleep.
Yeah, we put him to sleep. Yeah, he's probably nodded out somewhere. But and it's interesting. Ted raises the issue of the Japanese. I did come across. I haven't put them in because they're so big. I came across Japanese official history stuff on Ichigo in Japanese, maps in Japanese, which we obviously having you here, we'd have to really go into. Jim, Ted is a noted authority on the Japanese Army in World War II, and it'd be interesting to have your input on it because what I did was I went further into the operations in Asia, such as New Guinea, Saipan, Burma operations going on at this point in time. Remember, this is the time of Kohima in fall, and also Operation Ichigo in China. And it's sort of a high watermark in the sense of the Japanese in World War II, at least in China, and in their campaign against India. But again, getting back to the Red Army, I can see in the future it's probably better for us to break this up and do this in smaller chunks, and then we can get more accomplished because there's a lot of material to go through. And we're barely touching it. We haven't even
stuff will be huge.
We haven't even gone to the operations, and I have to admit that I'm trying to get a control of the flow of operations, which is difficult because it is very complicated. Where the Russian literature is very vast. This is again, as Alex was mentioning, we went up to New York Public Library. New York Public Library has access to the reserve collections of Princeton and Columbia University, and Princeton has a pretty good collection out there. And what we could see was there at least 50 to 60 titles since 2000 in Russian on Operation Bagration. So and so that was an eye opener to us because again, consider how every year or 2 years a new series of books will come out over D-Day. So that's clearly their D-Day in their minds. Now, the one thing about the D-Day literature, which I have to confess is sort of an ironic thing in the midst of domestic politics here in the United States, because you have someone like Trump, who's a complete anti-Atlanticist. He's, at the very least, you could say that. I'm sort of giving him, a lofty pronunciation there. In the latest Foreign Affairs, there's a very good article by somebody who was on his National Security Council about his foreign policy. And here we have somebody who is actively seeking to break up NATO. It's just amazing. And here's this situation where we're still, when we look at the memory of the Normandy campaign, and D-Day, it's essentially the ethos of Atlanticism. That we're fighting with an allied army, Britain, United States, all the powers that are thrown out of power by the Germans in the first phase of World War II, and yet we have this contradiction with the domestic politics of the United States having this really strong isolationism right now, which is quite concerning. And we don't have to, of course, talk about the latest events in the past couple of weeks in terms of the latest polling data, which shows that Trump has gained a big oomph from the disastrous debate of Biden and Trump several weeks ago. And I just thought about that in all this. Now, in terms of the Russians, I think the Russians, in terms of their offensive operations in Ukraine right now, look at the way they're phasing their operations along the line. Now, what did strike me as interesting, we didn't get David, that young fellow who's been 2 years in combat in Ukraine tonight. So be very interesting to hear what he has to say, because he'll probably, because he's too busy fighting right now. He's up there near Kharkiv. But there's no doubt to me that the Russians have these kind of operations as their ideal in their mind. I mean, because we're talking about, look what we're talking about. We're talking about 2 million troops plus concentrated with immense materiel that essentially is concentrated and launches a successful grand offensive along several army front lines at the same time, and succeeds in enveloping and destroying an army group in the space of a week. I mean, that's what's remarkable about this operation. And that's the kind of thing that they're trying to emulate with what's going on in the fighting in Ukraine, I'm pretty sure. But anyway, Hal, do you want to make any comments before we head out into Wild Blue Yonder here? No. All right. And all right. And what we'll do is we will Kenny was saying, "Oh my God, you guys are going on so damn long." So what we'll do is we'll make sure that we get this in bite-sized chunks, and do that. This is partly my fault because I gave Alex a pretty large PowerPoint to go through, so you can blame it all on me.
I added a little bit.
Yeah, I know, but again, you can see the importance of those of you as we're trying to understand this, it is important to get a broad sense of it. And then we haven't even put into here questions of Soviet foreign policy, which is really what gets interesting in this period of time. Because remember, this is after the Tehran conference. This is around the time when Churchill is having, we have this whole issue of Churchill in the spring up to May of 1944, having second doubts about Overlord. This is when there is a dispute in the Allied high commands over the issue of Anvil versus Ljubljana. Remember, this is when Churchill wants to send in an amphibious operation into the area around Ljubljana Gap in order to insert an army into the Balkans. And that, of course, is opposed by Eisenhower and Roosevelt. There's another issue where how is Roosevelt dealing with the Russians? Is he essentially going along with them in terms of let's put the British aside as a player in the post-Cold War, post-World War II order? All these issues that have to do, again, with down to it, interpretations of the Cold War. Because you have in these issues the various schools of the Cold War. We have the situation in Greece with the uprising in Greece at September when does the Communist Party, when does Elas rise in Athens in September? Yeah, September. And you have the issues in Eastern Europe vis-a-vis how the Axis is reacting to nationalism at this time. I think it's September, October, you have the put down by the Germans of the Slovakian national revolt. And there's all these issues, and then Finland's out of the war. What we haven't even talked about at the same time this is going on, one of the first operation in launch is an offensive operation in June 9th to drive Finland out of the war. And so there's all these aspects of the post-war order taking shape right in front of us as a result of Bagration. And that's why to me, it's a really interesting period of the war to talk about and look at and further parse through in ways we haven't done before. And so next time we'll do a little chunk, probably a critique. I probably would have been better, Alex just do the Russian army, I do the German army, and then we could just do that as a separate thing, rather than to, have it go on for a couple of hours. Because I always warn you guys, forget about it. You get us started, it's difficult to turn us off here. Plus, you just have to interrupt us. But again, as Ted says, it's really interesting stuff because a lot of this stuff I don't know. I'm learning for the first time. And I think we're all learning, and we'll learn more because, we got into, the detail we have about the actual operation as it breaks off. It's quite interesting. But as I see it, Maskarovka is a separate subject to deal with. And I wish David could be there. I mean, David would be far better to deal with this than me, because that's basically his book. But also somebody like the people at Cambridge who do that intelligence seminar at Cambridge University, I'd be interested to bring those guys in. Someone like Jonathan Haslam, who's now a fellow at Cambridge. I would want to. I've actually contacted in the past. He'd be somebody I'd like to get to talk about Soviet intelligence.
Steve, when he can.
Who?
Steve's logo when he can.
Well, Steve could come anytime he wants. Steve we could get to talk in detail about the armor issues in this period of time, which are very interesting. And then I think, as I said, the Soviet foreign policy issue, I think, is very important to layer in. And all these other political issues that I've raised, I think, have to be layered into these operations because, again, they're happening at the same time. And a lot of us look at this as, a lot of the history we take about this period of time is derived from the Cold War. I mean, our understanding of it is really shaped by the Cold War. That's why David's work is so important. Finally, we've got Lvov Sandomest. That's a whole separate operation to talk about. To go into the flow of fighting, which will, I don't completely feel comfortable with it yet. I'm getting there, so that I can understand it better. But that's almost 3 months of fighting.
And Glance's earlier book on the earlier first Belarusian front attempt to take Belarus. Was it like
right
February, March 44?
Right. Yeah. That the operations from January to April, whole separate ball of wax, and I haven't even worked on that. So that's separate from this. And then Lvov Sandomest takes us to Warsaw. The Lublin operation, which cuts off the Baltic, basically creates the Kurland pocket. Another operation that's very different. And then the knocking out of Romania out of World War II is again right there integrated into the Cold War. So all this, and then of course with Poland and the uprising of AK in early August of 1944, that of course is the culmination of the deterioration of the home army and its relation and its political leadership with the Soviet Union, particularly when the Katyn massacre, which we haven't talked about because that's revealed in 1943. That is something that causes a big break, but that break is coming anyway between AK and the Soviets, and the other issue about the Soviets is it gets into the question of, how do we understand Russian Soviet policies? Do we do it totally historically? Do we do it along the lines of they're breaking into Europe this time with a massive army? Is it something similar to 1920 and 21 when Tukhachevsky tries to break into Europe with the invasion of Poland? Certain arguments will make that. Is it totally separate? Is it totally different? What is the foreign policy of the Soviets like in the 20s and 30s? Is it defensive? Is it expansionary? How do we see the issue of the Comintern in that period of time? And how does this relate to the situation we're dealing with now in looking at 43 to 45? It gets into all these questions about the end of the war and all that. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of things to talk about. But I'll wait till Jim comes back. I guess he went to the boys' room. And so I'll bid him a fond farewell. But anyway, that's where we're at on this. Any other final comments, Ted or Rob, or no? All right. Well, on that note, Ken, thank you again. I know we kept you here forever and ever. And lesson learned. We'll do this.
Jim, thank you very much.
Do this differently next time. Okay. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye. For coming today, and we want to welcome you to the next event we'll show and do, which was with Professor David Stahill. That event will be on Wednesday, July 31st at 7:30 p.m. East Coast time. And we'll be bringing Professor David Stahill from the University of New South Wales in Australia. And he'll be talking about his first book that he did for Oxford University Press called Operation Barbarossa. He's the author of several books on the Eastern Front. You should tune in to Gregory McNiff. Gregory McNiff is doing a World War II discussion forum, which you can find at www.ww2. That's basically the letter I, lowercase, wwiidf.org. Or you can check out the Noisy Reality podcast that we keep on doing, which will be where this is posted at the GV Combine. Is that what it is, Kenny?
Yeah,
GV
it's right
Combine.
there. The GV Combine, 7507.
7507, the GV Combine 7507 at YouTube.
Yeah, I don't know why, but there it is.
And anyway, well, we wish everybody a good night and look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you so much.